call the roll.
Dr. Gasoy,
Present.
Mr. Chang, Mr. Chang, Ms. Wattenberg, Ms. Wattenberg, Dr. O'Leary,
I'm here tonight.
President Parker,
Present.
Dr. Sutter,
Present.
Ms. Thompson,
Present.
Dr. Reed.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Patterson,
Present.
Mr. O'Sullivan,
Present.
Ms. Dell, Ms. Dell. Mr. President, you have quorum.
Thank you. A quorum has been determined and the state board will now proceed with our meeting. First up, we have our leadership report. Members, you should have received it in your email a short time ago. Not go through everything line by line, but I will just give high level notes about what's in that report. The first is addressing Representative Reed's request to review the process of how we determine the topics of our meetings as well as the panels. We have determined that we're going to spend some time at our upcoming retreat to align on that process to just make sure we get it to a place where everyone feels good. In the meantime, which is likely just for this month, because we hope to have that retreat no later than June, although we're still looking for a date for that retreat. Emily and I, as vice president and president, will continue to ultimately decide with board input the direction of the meeting. In the leadership report, you'll see the link to the form where we ask members to share ideas for both panels as well as meeting discussions. But again, hopefully by next month, we'll have a process that we can all agree to should we think it needs to change, which it sounds like some members thinks it does. And I agree, I think it could be improved. Secondly, our upcoming retreat, you all received a notice. Please continue to share your availability. It would be great if we can meet in person, if folk are feeling safe and comfortable to do so. Obviously, we would do that in a safe manner, preferably outside, weather permitting. And as well as we would like, if possible, for our student representatives to join us. And so again, if you could notify via that doodle poll your availability, that would be great. I'm also really excited to share that we are recommending a summer recess for the board. So that recess would go into effect from July 15th until August 17th. There would be a few changes to our calendar, and we would move our July public meeting to July 14th. So that means we would have a working session and immediately the next week we would have the public meeting. And then we would cancel our August working session, which would be scheduled on August 4th, I believe. And then we would have our August public meeting on August 18th. And that meeting, given that we wouldn't have a working session, would just be for public comment and testimony. During this time, we are recommending that there would be no committee meetings, there are no formal meetings, there are no meetings with staff. And we are also providing staff a week of administrative time off where they will have the flexibility to choose the week that best suits their schedule. And this is all in a recognition that we know it's a lot. We want people to take care of themselves, their mental health. And we really appreciate that the staff has been going over and beyond in the past few months, but also this last year. Representative Sutter, is that a question? Yes.
So thank you so much, President Parker. I so appreciate this recess. I think it's really important. On the other hand, we have a scheduled social studies commitment during that time window. I think I have a workaround. I am happy to discuss it with leadership and with staff. I just want to flag that for you, that there is a CISAC meeting scheduled to provide feedback on the draft social studies standards for the week of July 26th. And I'm working in conjunction with OSSI's team on a workaround for that. Hi, Justin. I just got off the call with your OSSI Technical Writing Committee, and we proposed a couple of workarounds. So we'll follow up on that, but just wanted to note that for the record.
Please keep us posted, and thanks for flagging that.
Will do.
a few other quick updates, and then that will be it for the leadership report. You all should have seen the announcement of a joint council hearing that is focused on the direction of our education system post the pandemic. We are recommending and requesting that all members sign up to testify should you feel comfortable as individuals during that hearing. We think it's very important for the city to benefit from your rich expertise, but also to hear from your constituents. And so I'm sure you all have access to that, but feel free to reach out should you want to know more about how to sign up. And then last but not least, new members will be getting swag as well as headshots for everybody. And so John Paul will follow up soon to arrange a way for us to purchase that swag and for folk to pick it up in a safe manner. And when I say swag, it is including a draw bag as well as patch jackets that would say State Board of Education. And Representative Patterson, no, there are no names or numbers on it. So it is, but it is a nice jacket nonetheless. And so we're really excited to make sure you all have that. And then we will also notify the board when we'll be taking formal headshots in the weeks to come. So that is it for the leadership report. And with that, and I'm seeing no questions, I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Hayworth, for the Executive Director report.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a fairly short Executive Director's report today. I did want to note for members, we have a new for you, workplace tracking system that we have brought from the work plan that you approved in our public meeting into a software, an online software called Asana. It is a task-based system so that you can see in real time what tasks are coming up and what tasks are being completed, who they're being completed by, including activities done by board members. And we're hoping that the use of this system, which the staff have been using internally for a couple of years now, will help you understand a little bit more about where things are in process at any time that you want to check, whether that's 2 in the morning or if it's a time that the office isn't open. You can look at something and see exactly where in the process it is. And we're hopeful that that will help the transparency internally so that you understand sort of where we are in the larger process of the work plan. So in the coming days, you will be each getting an email from Asana to sign up for an account. And we have a fantastic intro video that Alex put together for you. And so you can watch that and it will explain step by step exactly how to do all of the functions that we think you will probably need. If you have any questions, certainly reach out to us and we will answer them, as quickly as we possibly can. I do also want to note the staff's deep appreciation for the board's understanding and generous leave for us during the recess. It does mean a lot to us and we appreciate it. That's it. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We will now move to our presentation from OSSE. I'm sorry, Representative O'Leary. Sorry about that.
John Paul, is the, or Alex, it would be better for Alex to answer probably. The last poll we got for the retreat was at the end of June. Are y'all out of school by that time? Alex?
Yeah, we're, I know for my school, we're like unofficially out of school the last week of May. So,
okay, so by the end of June, everybody will be out of school.
Yeah, by the end of June, everyone's out.
Okay, thank you.
By the end of June, got it. Okay, good clarifying question, Representative. Members, we will now turn to our colleagues from OSSE. We have with us Justin Tooley, Elizabeth Ross, and I'm not seeing her name unless I'm just missing something, but Siobhan Gibson, all from the Office of the State Superintendent of Education. They're here tonight to talk about to the board about OSSE's educator workforce initiatives. And so I am now going to turn it over to the OSSE team for your presentation.
All right, it is good to see everyone. I don't think anybody could be more excited about a state board recess than me. That is very exciting. So it sounds like John Paul will need to rethink maybe some of the dates and timelines that you see here in this presentation. This is fresh off the presses news for me, but I think we can figure out something to make it work if that's the board schedule. So John Paul, okay. I'm joined by Elizabeth Ross, and I will let her introduce herself now. This is a new face. She's been with our agency a good amount of time, but probably not a face that you've seen directly. So Elizabeth, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Justin. It's great to see some familiar faces as well as some new faces. As Justin shared, I work on our OSSI team. I am the Director of Educator Quality and Effectiveness in our Division of Teaching and Learning. And although I'm relatively new to OSSI, I've been there for about a year. I am a longtime DC resident and started my career teaching third grade here in DC at Simon Elementary School. So I am certainly not new to educator quality initiatives here in the District of Columbia. Delighted to be here this evening to talk to you more about what we are thinking and, of course, to take your questions.
All right. So John Paul, next slide. I know that our work around teachers has been an interest with the board for quite a while. And this is a place where we have some joint responsibilities that might be new to us, to many of you, because we've not done it before. So this will be another place where we embark on a journey together to think about our educator preparation programs. But we also want to use the sequence of many months over the next, through this year, to engage on broader educator workforce issues. So the purpose of this presentation is to sort of give a lay of the land. We're not prepared to do a full deep dive into all of these topics. I know you have a lot of questions because everyone is so interested. We'll take some time for questions, but it is more of an onboarding exercise to sort of give you a lay of the land of the things that we do, particularly for new members and also old members. Provide you with some resources that you can use as you do some of your work around teacher workforce related issues in your committees. And then we will embark on this journey together over several months and do deeper dives into a lot of the work that encompasses all of our teacher workforce efforts. So we've done our introductions. We're going to do an overview of our efforts impacting educators. I'll go to Elizabeth to talk about our theory of action with the Division of Teaching and Learning. And then we will talk about the work that we're doing around education preparation providers and our next steps moving towards some action with you. Does that sound good? John Paul, next slide. Next slide. So I wanted to give a lay of the land. So OSSI, many divisions. So if you've not looked at our org chart ever, I encourage you to go look at the org chart. That'll help you sort of get a lay of the land. But we have a Division of Teaching and Learning. And you can read the vision for the Division of Teaching and Learning on the screen. But there's some key streams of work under the leadership of Siobhan Gibson. One is educator licensure, educator preparation program approval, which is what we will be working together on with you. Educator professional development. So we're always interested in trying to improve the efficacy of our teacher workforce through providing professional development supports across content areas. And then also collection and reporting of data pertaining to the educator workforce. That doesn't lie completely in the Division of Teaching and Learning. That lies also in the Division of Assessment and Research. But this has been a space where I know the board has had particular interest, and we have made some changes that we will talk about in the future about how we're building our capacity around addressing some of this workforce data issues, some of these workforce data issues. So educator licensure, education preparation program approval, professional development, and educator workforce data is like the bulk of the work that our Division of Teaching and Learning does. Next slide. So educator credentialing. So educators in DCPS must hold a valid DC educator credential, and many teachers in public charter schools do as well. So the purpose of licensure and credential is to make sure that educators possess basic skills and knowledge to enter a classroom in DCPS. I've fielded some questions from state board members regarding educator licensure issues with constituents, and we're more than happy to, I usually send those to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth sends those to her team. But this is a place where sometimes I'll get inquiries of someone having an issue with the license and helping sort of rectify that. But how does it work? Educators have to apply. They submit evidence of required documentation based with the regulatory requirements. This also includes a background check. OSSE reviews the application to determine that the application is sufficient, and we issue the credential. The credentials, depending on the type of credential, lasts for so long and is available for renewal if it's a standard credential on a timeline. Next slide, John Paul. I keep on thinking I have the power to change the slides. I don't think I have that power. All right. Overview of education preparation providers and their approval. So these are teaching schools and teaching programs. So this is where teachers will go to learn how to teach. We call these, as a matter of regulation, educator preparation providers. Educators can use their educator preparation to help meet DC's educator credentialing requirements. So the way that this sort of interacts with licensure is this says, if in order to get a license in the District of Columbia, you have to go to a program that is approved for accreditation by the agency, right? So there's a linkage between educator preparation program approval and licensing. So these are, so you come out of the education preparation provider in DC and you can get a license from us. OSSE also approves education preparation providers, that's a mouthful, to prepare educators who are eligible to earn a DC educator credential. So how does this work? Broadly, and we will over the next few months go into more extensive detail on this process because this is the bulk of the work we're going to be working on together, is the providers apply for initial or renewal approval, and they submit a lot of evidence and undergo a site review, and then we review and make a determination for approval. Next slide, John Paul. Educator professional development. So we believe that educator practice matters. The knowledge, skills, and mindsets that teachers possess can have a drastic impact on student achievement. And we know that the profession over teachers' career changes and the needs of students are changing and curriculum changes over time. And it's important that teachers stay sharp on their skills and abilities. We provide professional development in content areas. We also provide a lot of professional development on special education, behavioral support, and educators can come and sign up for these for free. We publish a full directory periodically, I think every 3 months or so, of all of the programs and all of the experiences that we offer through the agency, and they can sign up for those. Next slide, John Paul. And then lastly, educator workforce data. So it's important that LEAs and schools make personnel decisions based on good data. And we know that there's been significant public interest in educator workforce data. Many moons ago, we worked together on the DC school report card. And we did a lot of engagement to hear about what data was important to the community. And teacher data was the number one area. We were able at that time to provide some information on credentials on the DC school report card. We were also able at that time to have years of experience, but the public certainly wanted more. So this is a place that I know the board has been interested in getting us to collect and report more information. That's why for school year 2021, we launched updates to our faculty and staff data collection. And LEAs must report faculty and staff roster information, including the role and FTE percentage for all instructional, administrative, and support staff and LEAs in schools filled by direct hire or contracting. They report all of that data to us through an annual data collection. I think what might be the most helpful thing, I said a lot and was very high level, But we wanted to provide you with hyperlinks of where you can go and sort of, you all are all very, very smart people. Where's the information? I want to go and put my hands on it and read it and get that knowledge myself. So this slide here gives you links to all of our resources over licensure, educational professional development, EPP approval, and our data, our educator workforce data collection. So if you go and look there, you can find deliverables, PowerPoint presentations, the underlying regulatory statutes, our guidance, all relating to those particular topics. All right, Elizabeth, I'll go on mute and you can finish us up.
Thanks so much for giving that comprehensive background, and Justin. I'd now love to talk a little bit more about why we do the work that we do. John Paul, if you could advance us to the next slide. As everyone in this room knows, educator quality matters hugely. Among school-based factors, it is the most important one, influencing student learning and student lives. On our Division of Teaching and Learning at OSSE, we believe that if we strengthen our educator preparation provider approval while simultaneously providing robust educator and LEA supports and providing the field with actionable educator workforce data, we will have improved educator practice, which research consistently demonstrates will result in increased student achievement and positive lifetime outcomes. Next slide, please, John Paul. To talk a little bit more about educator preparation provider approval, which we are excited to work with the State Board on over in the coming months, I would love to provide a little bit of background on the statutory and regulatory requirements that govern our work in this space and are better described on the next slide, please, John Paul. So there are a couple of different things that are fitting together here in a combination of the DC code and the DCMR, which govern OSSE's authority to establish the educator credentialing requirements and then carve out a unique role for the State Board of Education in approving the standards for accreditation and certification of teacher preparation programs of colleges and universities or teacher preparation academies. Ultimately, the graduates of those teacher preparation programs of colleges and universities or teacher preparation academies will be eligible to earn a DC educator credential, which OSSE issues consistent with our requirements and that are memorialized in the DC Code of Municipal Regulations. Next slide, please, John Paul. The current landscape in this space for this work is split between institutions of higher education, which are listed on this slide, and alternate route organizations and institutions. This is the current landscape. Each of these programs is currently operating in DC. And John Paul, if you'll move us onto the next slide. It fits nicely into our theory of action. We believe that the district benefits from and the district needs are well met from a variety of organizations and institutions operating here in DC. So not only in institutions of higher education, but also in our alternate route organizations and institutions. We also acknowledge that in DC, we have some unique benefits that, other geographic locations do not have. And so we want to make sure that our work in this space is right-sized to the influence that our area EPPs, both institutions of higher education and alternate route organizations and institutions, have on the teacher workforce. We want to make sure that these organizations and institutions, both of higher education and alternate, are addressing the needs that our district LEAs and schools have. We want to be sure that they put us in a position to recognize excellence, to set clear standards for quality, and to encourage struggling providers and programs to improve. We want to be certain that they are meaningful for the regulated entity, that is for the educator preparation providers, and for the public, including consumers who may be selecting among the variety of programs that DC offers. Finally, we want to be sure that these programs are flexible enough to provide innovative, high-quality pathways to teaching. Next slide, please. As Justin shared it at the outset, we may need to make some adjustments to our timeline, but we're here today in order to provide you with an overview, to answer some questions, and then John Paul, if you will move us on to the next slide, really set the stage for work that is to come over the course of the next 4 to 5 months. In May, we're providing a general overview of our work in this space and also answering any questions that you may have. In June, we'd like to do a deep dive of our accreditation standards. In July, we'll do a deep dive on the accreditation process, and recognizing the new information about summer recess are, of course, happy to make any necessary adjustments. And then in late summer, early fall, we would move towards a standards approval and do a deep dive on our educator data and educator professional development. Ultimately, we are aiming to finalize our recommendations on EPP approval with those approved standards in place by October of 2021, so by fall of this year. And then we will work during the 21-22 school year to enable our EPPs to implement those new regulations. And I know there are some questions in the chat, including about specific citations that I believe may have been answered. Thank you so much for acknowledging that the July working session and public meeting would still enable this process to work. That is great to hear. And now I'm happy to open it up for questions.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Justin. Members, I'm going to recommend that we suspend time for this portion of question and answer, but with that ask that we all respect our OSCE colleagues' time tonight. And John Paul, if you can, I'm not saying John Paul, and so I'm happy to do it. So I will call members as I see you raise your hand. And again, I'm just going left to right. I don't know who went first. So with that, Representative Sutter.
Thanks, President Parker. So I really appreciate this. This is super comprehensive, and the deck that John Paul sent us has all the hyperlinks, so I've already gone down the rabbit hole a little bit. One question I have is there a process in this approval of new regulations for the public to weigh in on input on the regulations? And I ask this specifically because I actually want to give a little shout out. I don't know if she's watching. I teach graduate students at American University, and they had to write policy proposals this semester. And one of my students wrote a policy proposal for something she would like to see included in your EPP regulations. So I'm really curious about the process because I think it's a pretty great suggestion. She's got interest in making sure culturally relevant practice and pedagogy on that is included in the educator preparation process certification. So I'd like to find out how the public can provide input so that perhaps she can provide input and make her good suggestion to you directly.
Thank you so much for that nice invitation to talk a little bit more about the public engagement process in our regulatory process. For individuals who haven't had a chance to engage in this process, it is a fascinating opportunity for a regulatory agency like OSCE to hear and be in a position to comment directly to members of the public. So we released earlier this spring an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, which we received comments on. We will use those comments in order to strengthen our proposal, which we anticipate issuing as a formal notice of proposed rulemaking in midsummer of this year. And once that goes out, it will be open for public comment. We will be receiving comments both electronically and if individuals are interested in sending them to us via the Postal Service, we can also accept them that way. And then for every comment that we receive in the final rule, we will include a preamble that includes responses to those comments. So we invite comment from any interested member of the public. We will certainly be sharing that notice when it is open for public comment via our OSCE social media channels and other publication channels, and invite the public. We will also be making that information available on our OSCE website, and we invite the public to keep an eye out for that. And again, that timeline is anticipated to be midsummer. We're looking at July of this year.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative O'Leary.
Yes, I've got several questions, but if you don't have the answers, if you could just get the answers to me, I'd appreciate it. The first is, how many universities and colleges in the metro area, I'm thinking about Montgomery, Tacoma maybe, or Prince George's Community College, have viable student teaching programs with DC schools?
Yeah,
I know that Howard does. I know that GW might.
Thank you so much for that question. I cannot tell you about colleges and universities that are accredited and approved by agencies outside of
Okay, just in DC.
Outside of DC. We have 15 colleges and universities that have student teaching programs here in DC. Currently, and I'm happy to provide you the full list of those programs. They are split almost evenly. It's seven traditional institutions of higher education, 8 alternative route organizations and institutions. What that student teaching looks like differs from institution to institution. And so, for example, we have a program more of a residency model where a student is in residence at a particular school, getting their student teaching experience over a longer period of time. And then we have shorter programs that follow a different model.
Okay, I noticed that Georgetown's not mentioned on your list. And I also know that as someone who was in the schools for a long time, that there were only a couple of those schools that had student teachers at my particular school. And I think that one of the things that you need to look at when you're setting up this program is to almost mandate that the student teaching programs in these universities feed into DC public schools and the charter schools. And also that student teachers should have some kind of a benefit in hiring, as far as a carrot on a stick. After they finish their student teaching, that they should have some kind of access to those schools. And the second question is, why don't all the teachers in DC and all the public school teachers, DC PS and DC public charter schools, have to have a valid DC educational credential, since that is in the code? That educators in public schools have to be licensed. And what I'm hearing is that not all teachers have to be licensed.
Thanks so much for those questions. I'll take them in the order in which they were asked. First, in regard to Georgetown, Georgetown University Educator Preparation Provider exists in the District of Columbia as an alternate route organization and institution rather than an institution of higher education, because it is a separate program under Georgetown University. So that is in the second column, and it is currently an approved provider here in DC that is offering 2 programs that do feed into DC public schools. And of course, I'm happy to follow up and provide more information on that if it could be helpful. Next, as we move along over the course of the summer, we're excited to provide some more in-depth information about our regulatory proposal. But as part of that proposal, we are keenly interested in better understanding how our educator preparation providers are meeting the unique needs of our DC schools, and that includes through their student teaching practicums, particularly those practicums that involve robust and diverse instructional experiences in a wide variety of DC public schools. So I'm really excited to get that language in front of you and to talk more about whether there are opportunities to modify or strengthen that proposal. Finally, I really appreciate your question around educator credentialing. As Justin shared, many educators throughout the city do hold valid DC educator credentials. OSSE's interpretation of our regulatory authority in this space is that our requirements apply uniquely to District of Columbia schools, teachers, the teacher subspecialties, the subject areas that are enumerated in that provision, as well as administrators. And so I appreciate that question, but our interpretation of that is that applies uniquely to District of Columbia public schools.
I just asked that because I know how horribly important it is for teachers to come, when teachers come in to teach in DC and they've never been in a classroom in DC, they're at a distinct disadvantage in trying to figure out what they're going to do. Being a beginning teacher has enough on the plate without having to try to figure out what they're doing. And the last question is a softball question. What is FTE?
FTE stands for full-time equivalency. So it is essentially, you know, a term that is used when making employment determinations. So how many individual slots do you have for a full-time equivalent person? So if someone is in a part-time position, then that would be 0.5 FTE.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Very helpful.
Thank you, Representative Reed.
Thanks. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you for your presentation. My question kind of piggybacks off a response to Representative O'Leary regarding the 15, I guess, education or 15 colleges and then also training programs. What is OSSE's role then in consistency in, I guess, the content of those programs is my first question. And then I would just thought the second one, is there any considerations around like the reach and given the mobility of education professionals from, you know, Virginia, Maryland?
Excellent questions. Thank you so much for both of them. Under this regulatory package, OSSE is really interested in doing two things, one of which is making sure that we continue to enable innovation, flexibility in the space and enable a variety of different providers to operate, while simultaneously recognizing that the individuals who graduate from these programs will all be eligible, provided that they meet our other educator credentialing requirements for the very same educator credential. And so it's incumbent upon OSSE to ensure that we are maintaining guardrails in place that demonstrate to us satisfactorily that individuals graduating from these programs are eligible for an OSSE educator credential. And so we are moving into this regulatory space with those aims in mind. Does that answer your first question?
Yes, it does. And I'm glad to hear that.
Great. And I'm sorry, will you refresh my memory as to your second question?
The second question is around the region because of the mobility of teachers.
Yes, of course. We are keenly attuned to where we sit geographically. That provides us with some fantastic opportunities. There are many reasons why DC is a really attractive place to go to school, to live, and to work. But we also know that our borders are very porous between Maryland and between Virginia. And so we work closely with our colleagues at the Maryland State Department of Education, as well as at the Virginia Department of Education. We do have in place an educator credential licensure reciprocity policy, which enables individuals who hold a full-time educator credential from either a full standard license from either Maryland or Virginia and from other states to provide us with that educator credential and they still have to demonstrate that they meet certain requirements in the District of Columbia, for example, background check requirements and other things that help us ensure the safety and security of our students. But the reciprocity policy can provide a quicker pathway to educator credentialing for individuals who are have already demonstrated that they are fully licensed in other jurisdictions.
Last question, I promise, because your response has me thinking too. Does OSSE have, this is more me not knowing, does OSSE have any role then in monitoring that you know programs are meeting certain standards and rigor of their programs, and then like also providing resources similar to what happens with schools when, you know, folks are going to be performing, you know, what's the role there?
What a wonderful question. OSSE has very close relationships with the 15 EPPs, and we are fortunate in that 15 is a number that we can actually wrap our arms around and work with very closely. Over the course of the past year, in light of the really quick shifts that our educator preparation providers had to make in order to ensure not only that they were continuing to provide services to their students, but also supporting their students through the unique challenges that came from, for example, student teaching in a different environment, potentially in a virtual environment as compared to in schools. We pulled our educator preparation providers together for a series of listening, leading, and learning sessions where we brought to the table some research and best practices, but also provided some space for schools to learn from each other and to take advantage of some of the diversity of programs that we have. For example, we have programs and providers operating in DC that had more experience operating in a virtual environment than some of our traditional institutions of higher education. And so we felt very fortunate to be able to put those programs in a position to be able to share their lessons learned with their colleagues and their peers across the city. In terms of ongoing monitoring and support under our new regulatory package, OSSE will have as its first and primary lever that initial approval process. And as part of that initial approval process, programs and providers could either earn full approval, or if there are certain deficiencies that are identified, could earn approval for a shorter period of time, which would put OSSE in a position to be able to intervene and receive more data, a better understanding of how the program is working to address and satisfy those deficiencies. And we are really excited to be in a position where we're able to support our educator preparation providers in that way.
You, Representative Sullivan.
Thank you, President Parker. My question is about the teacher credentialing. So I heard your answer to Representative O'Leary's question. Are public charter schools required to release data about which teachers they hired, for those teachers, if they do have teacher credentials? Is that data that OSSE collects from public charter schools?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So the educator credentialing requirements in each public charter school are governed by charter. And so each public charter school can dictate in its charter whether it will require that credentialing or not. And then in working with all of our LEAs to collect data on educator workforce issues, OSSE collects data on any number of workforce issues, including the percentage of educators that are teaching and leading LEAs who are credentialed.
Okay, so is that data that can be shared with the state board about what percentage of charter teachers do have the teacher credentialing? Just because I guess we know all DCPS teachers have it. I'm just interested to see how many public charter schools have it, public charter school teachers have it.
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. Those are certainly data that we collect, and I don't want to speak out of turn. So I will work with my team, and we'll either follow up with those data or with an explanation of when you can expect to receive them.
Okay, thank you.
I appreciate that. Representative Thompson.
This is super helpful, and I look forward to digging into the deck and the links. I actually have a question that's unrelated to the presentation, though. I'm curious, since we had a special working session around the waiver requests for testing and accountability, if we'll do something similar for the ARAP funding. I know that every state gets its first 2/3 of funding, and then they have to submit a plan to receive the last third, which is due at the beginning of June. And I know that Superintendent Young isn't here, and you all may or may not have the answer to this, but at least it can be taken back and put on the radar, because I know it's something that we've been pretty interested in as a board.
Yeah, I can answer that question. This is a place where the plan requires that we have meaningful consultation with the public. We are still working on our plan and sort of the timeline of rolling that out, and that's something we can talk with the board leadership about as far as next steps.
Looking forward to that.
Great question and push, Representative Thompson. Representative Wattenberg.
Ruth, you're still on mute.
Well, we can't hear you, Representative Wattenberg. I'm going to go to the next person to give you some time to hopefully figure it out. Vice President Gasoy.
Oh, I think it's worked.
Yep. There you go.
Keep my camera on.
So I'm on 2 devices. Are you hearing echoes?
We do hear echo. Is it possible that you can mute your computer?
No, but I was going to chat it.
That works. Hopefully that's not how it's going to be the entire night. But okay. Sorry about that. We will get a question to your answers via chat. Vice President Gasoy.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the presentation. So back when we had an ed committee on the council, there was a recommendation from that committee for ASSE to actually create an office focused on identifying and removing barriers for recruiting and hiring international teachers. And it was really specifically looking at, improving and expanding bilingual education in DC. And that is something that the state board has done some advocacy and recommendations around. So I was just wondering if that is something that you could speak to.
Yeah, I can. Thank you for that excellent question. I am so pleased and proud to share that this is an area where we are really doing some very, very exciting work. We are the only jurisdiction outside of Puerto Rico that offers our basic skills test in a non-English language. We offer the PC-MAS exam, which is a Spanish language basic skills test. And I am not an expert in English language learning or in bilingual education, but it is my understanding from the experts with whom I've worked on this that it is actually most important to offer the basic skills exam in Spanish for native Spanish language speakers. There are currently no vendors, so neither ETS nor College Board nor Pearson has a secondary content exam except for the Spanish language secondary content exam that is in Spanish language. And so we don't have an opportunity there at the secondary content level. But again, it's my understanding from experts in the space that that secondary content exam does not tend to be a barrier, because for someone who, for example, is a native Spanish language speaker and has mathematics expertise, there is sufficient context on the secondary content mathematics exam that passage of that is not a barrier, in the same way that passage of the basic skills exam in English would be. So we work very closely with DCPS and with it is College Board who administers that exam to ensure that that pipeline remains open to help ensure that we have a broad and diverse array of native Spanish speakers in particular who are able to earn their ASSE Educator credential. In addition, we offer periodic webinars on the licensure process in Spanish in order to first recruit and engage the native Spanish population of individuals and make sure that they have the necessary information that they need in order to become credentialed here in DC. We have, as I think everyone on this committee knows, we have an office at ASSE that focuses on multilingual education, and would be happy to take some questions back to my colleagues who work in that office in order to follow up if it would be helpful. But from the credentialing standpoint, those are two big steps that we've taken, and we are excited and proud that we've been able to move in that direction.
Thank you. I do know that the some of the folks that I worked with on the resolution that we drafted around this issue, we're really pushing for more robust steps to be taken. And so maybe it would be helpful to reshare that with the office. So it seems like this is good timing for that. So we'd be happy to have a conversation, but they will probably be in touch too, now that they know this is happening. So thank you so much.
Thanks, and I welcome that continued engagement.
Thank you.
And I see there's a question in the chat.
Yeah, I'll read it for those the public. It reads, and this is from Representative Wattenberg. I understand that for charters, the school determines what credentials, license standards it will require. For DCPS, I understand that they can't get a credential unless they have graduated from a school that has an approved EPP or from a school that is approved by a state with a reciprocal agreement. For DCPS, is there any other requirement for getting licensed, credential to work in a specific space? For example, does a high school math teacher need anything specific beyond graduation from an approved provider? Or an early grade reading teacher, does that person need anything more than graduation from an EPP?
This is a great question, Representative Wattenberg. So the individual content exams that all educators in DC must demonstrate competency, all educators who are seeking a DC educator credential must demonstrate competency in are content specific. And so there is a basic skills exam, which tests basic skills, so basic reading, language arts, mathematics skills, and then there are content exams. And so, for example, for an individual who is seeking to earn an OSCE educator credential in secondary math, they would be responsible for passing that secondary math exam alongside their basic skills exam.
Also, when able to, I'm sorry, just to be clear on basic skills, just to extend, there are opportunities for people to use past assessment scores like SAT, whatever, and not have to take a test again if they meet, or GRE, I think is another one of the assessments. So we allow that battery of assessments to be used to substitute in lieu of basic skills, so they don't have to take the basic skills test. But generally, yes, that's how that. So there's a competency in content. You got to know what you're going to teach. And then there's like the pedagogical practices and licenses. So think of those as two sides of a coin.
Thank you so much, Justin. That's exactly right. So earning a certain score on ACT, SAT, or GRE can demonstrate basic skills just as passing a basic skills exam developed by Praxis, particularly for entry to the teaching profession.
Thank you. I am not seeing any other hands or requests, so I will ask a few questions and make a few quick notes. One is, I appreciate OSCE's theory of action that includes comprehensive and robust support of LEAs. You'll notice tonight we're going to be talking about OSCE's support of LEAs in comparison to other states. This is an area of interest for several members of the board. We also plan at our public meeting to talk about how various state agencies are supporting LEAs. And while I do appreciate the work that OSCE is doing, I would just love to keep the conversation going with you all about ways we might be able to build on the supports that are provided to LEAs here in DC. Another point I would make is around, and this is actually a question, the teacher workforce data, Justin, that you mentioned that you all are collecting. Is that information going to be reported, or was that just a point of information to say you're collecting it?
Yes, so great question. So we have collected, and we are still talking internally about how our delivery of that, but I do anticipate us sharing more data than we have in the past on what we collected. And building that capacity and that capability over time. I think it's important to think like in a first year data collection, it's hard to have a reference point. So that may limit us a little bit, but and some things we want to look at longitudinally as well. But yes, we will be able, we do anticipate sharing information from that data collection and begin doing that on a more routine basis.
Gotcha.
More about that as we discuss that particular topic in the future. I'll have more specifics about that.
Awesome. And so I won't even bother asking about a timeline, but I will say, I remember at the hearing last year, one of the justifications from OSSI, given why the council shouldn't act on our legislation, was that you all were collecting this data and were going to willingly share it. And so with that, I'm operating with good faith and you all have been good partners here. I would like to just cross-reference the things we were asking for in that legislation to see, and hopefully to see all of those things shared out based on your data collection. Another quick question is about the process, and this is super technical. So I appreciated the timeline, seeing the starting in May going through, it seemed like late fall. Will the state board have an opportunity to weigh in on the applications before there's a final vote on so if I recall I'm trying to remember the graphic, but there was a presentation of the standards and there was going to be an approval of the standards. Will there be feedback opportunities for the state board in between that process? Or is it more so just a point of information and voting at the end?
Elizabeth, do you want me to take this one? Okay. So the law states the standards. We are wanting to do, one is to talk about the standards that we will use to assess the EPP providers. That is a state board approval piece. Then there is the regulatory process that we will use to evaluate this, which references that we use the standards that you all approve consistent with the law, right? So your vote would be over the standards. But yes, we anticipate, when we set this up, we wanted to be very transparent about the whole house, like our house pertaining to teacher workforce. And we look forward to the state board continuing to use its advisory power or its advisory role to provide us feedback on some of the things, even if they don't take explicit votes. Things where we will seek approval of the standards that we use, but the state board is also able to comment on our regulatory packages through regular notice and comment as a public stakeholder. And then also too, and this will make more sense as we go through the regulatory package, is that places where we should be having additional emphasis on things, like as far as like what evidence should a creditor have to demonstrate their ability to like serve diverse student populations or such and such. That's a type of place that doesn't require, like that would be the agency's role to decide, but we're very much open to hearing feedback on some of those artifacts that we would collect to make that particularly meaningful.
We will
the hard part, just sort of in general, and as we go along, you'll hear one of the places where, as we thought about this from a policy perspective, is we are not a large jurisdiction, and we are very different, and like a lot of the vast majority of our teacher workforce has been trained elsewhere. But it's not like Tennessee, where most of the Tennessee teachers go to a school in Tennessee because Tennessee's so big, it has so many universities. Like DC is a little different. Like this is an important lever, but might not be as big of a lever as it is in like a Virginia or a Tennessee because of our size. So striking that balance in a meaningful way, I think is going to be it's probably the biggest challenge that we have here. Because if we're really thinking about improving educator efficacy, that's why we had this slide on theory of action. It's like we had very different levers, and we want to make sure that the state board is abreast of all of those levers that the agency has, whether they're things that you all approve or not.
Got it. And then a quick point, and then I'll end with this question. I know there's a lot of interest in the education ecosystem about grow your own programs. And so just throwing that out there as you're considering standards and intersections, that is something that a lot of folk are interested in. I won't even.
No, I think this is something that Elizabeth can talk a little bit about specifically. So yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth.
That's exactly right. We really, really appreciate that interest. We've been in touch with a number of stakeholders who have a keen interest in making sure that their proposals are on OSSE's radar, and we are continuing to have conversations, and where we can be helpful in providing feedback. Absolutely. Providing that feedback, because it's important to us, as I know it is to the state board, that any types of new initiatives would work well within the broader educational ecosystem. Some of the research coming out of academia and grow your own programs that have been running for quite some time is certainly exciting, and we are staying well abreast of that research at OSSE, particularly around the ability of those programs to attract to the teaching profession individuals who might not otherwise be engaged in the profession. So we are well aware of that interest and excited by it.
We also encourage the board, particularly new members, to go, and although our educator workforce is not fresh off the presses, we still believe that it is relevant. And I think we did a relatively decent job regarding the supply and demand, the supply and demand of the educator workforce, right? And it's important, as we have conversations about that, to think about, there's some good analytics in there about what subject areas are harder to staff. There's also some good analytics in there regarding where, based on our enrollment trends, where we're going to see greater student need for teachers. So it's important to go and get familiar with some of that information, although I know it's not as robust as many of you want. It is particularly it is insightful directionally of some of the things that we still are trying to address. So yes, thanks, Elizabeth, for putting that in.
Thank you. For the sake of time, I'm going to leave it there. But I really do appreciate you all sharing and look forward to engaging in the process. So thank you, Justin and Elizabeth.
All right, have a good night.
Thank you.
Members, we will now turn to hear about the Capital Guardian Youth Challenge Academy, which is a life intervention, dropout, reintegration, and GED preparatory program. The District of Columbia's National Guard, in partnership with OSSE, provides a structured environment for student cadets to promote academic achievement, improve self-esteem, and develop leadership skills. I am thrilled that we have with us tonight retired Sergeant Major Herman Preston, as well as military instructor Gerard Whalen, to learn more about this program and the work that they are engaged in now to expand its impact. So with that, Mr. Preston, I'm going to turn it over to you to kick us off, and feel free to turn it over to your colleague, Mr. Whalen.
Well, good evening. Thanks for having us. Hey, Jock, how are you, my friend? It's been a retired Herman Preston. I'm in the DC National Guard for the last 33 years. I'm currently serving as the Director of DC Government Operations for DC National Guard. Mr. Walloon, who will do the presentation, is a missions coordinator for the Capital Guardian Youth Challenge Program, where we accept students who drop out of school for whatever reason and give them a second chance. So we'll do some questions and answers on the financial pieces as well, but I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Walloon, so he'll give you the whole program on challenge. Gerard?
Thank you, Mr. Preston. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. First of all, I just want to say thank you for even giving me the opportunity to present tonight at this State Board of Education meeting with a vast range of educators. The Capital Guardian Youth Challenge is a very important program for our district. It targets those young men and those young women who have been disengaged and just kind of lost their way, and we give them an opportunity. I'd like to share my screen right now with everybody. And can someone, whoever's hosting, give me the opportunity to share a screen, please?
Give me 1 second.
Okay, and I promise you guys this will be painless. It'll be 4 slides, and I'll answer any questions you have.
Okay, you should be able to do so now.
Okay, and I did. Thank you. So right now, about our academy, the Capital Guardian, as it was stated earlier, is a community-based organization that targets youth who are at the greatest risk for substance abuse, teen pregnancy, delinquency, and criminal activity within our district. The Challenge program helps them become productive citizens in not only society, but in America's future. As a volunteer program, which we are totally 100% volunteer program, the Challenge strives to develop the life skills, educational levels, and future employment potential while instilling moral and ethic standards in our participants. Our program is an award-winning program that has been recognized as one of the nation's most effective and cost-efficient program for at-risk youth. Our slogan is just having the courage to change. Our main focus is really intervening and reclaiming the lives of at-risk youth and giving them values, skills, and discipline necessary to succeed as adults. So if you look at our mission statement here, this is what we strive to do here at the Capital Guardian Youth Challenge. And I'm sorry, I cannot see that my whole screen here. But as you can see, this is our mission here at the Capital Guardian Youth Challenge. Our academy assists and maximizes the talents of youth between the ages of 16 to 18 years of age who reside in the District of Columbia by forming a strong partnership and creating and maintaining a viable plan for the educational and career goals and reaffirming the skills and talents they currently possess. Do I have any questions about the program at this time? No? So what do we offer? We offer room and board. We're funded 75% federally and 25% to the state. So the cost to family is nothing. We are a 22-week residency program. The cadets stay on campus for 22 weeks. And then for 12 months, once they leave the program, we consider that the post-residential phase. We have our case managers who really act as guidance counselors and stay with the young men and young women and guide them if they need their resume updated, if they're looking for a job, if they're trying to get into the military or even college. We give them the opportunity to obtain a District of Columbia high school diploma. We offer vocational trades that they can select from, 3D printing, scholarship opportunities. They'll receive 40 hours of community service, self-sufficiency. They'll be doing everything on their own, financial literacy through a partnership with Bank of America. So at week 3, we partner with Bank of America and we put money in their account every month while they're in the program to include a year after they leave. We offer life coping skills, a structured quasi-military environment. So although we say quasi-military, by no means are we gearing them to go into the military, but we take characteristics from the military that have proven to be successful for the young men and women once they leave the program. Something as simple as they address everybody, all staff as sir or ma'am, and we address them as Mr. and Mrs. And we provide them with the leadership skills, and we prepare the youth to enter society as productive citizens through our 8 core components. Some of those components are leadership and fellowship skills, responsible citizenship, life coping skills, job skills, physical fitness, health and hygiene, as well as service to the community. What we are not, we're not a detention center, we're not a GED program, and we're not a boot camp. What we are we're looking for partners to assist us with getting the word out to these young men and women to help them to get re-engaged into society. Our points of contact is myself as the missions coordinator. You see my number there, as well as my email, and my assistant is Mr. Hector Lamas. You can learn more about our program on www.cgyca.org, and our next class begins October 12th, 2021. Do I have any questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, I want to thank you for the presentation. I'm a veteran, and I know that when you said it's not a boot camp, I thought boot camp was one of the best experiences I ever had in my life. And I know that the military helped me be the person I am today. And I want to thank you all for doing all. Where is the residence?
Residents relocated in Lower Maryland, sir.
Okay, did that used to be something else?
It used to be the old DC Youth Detention Center back in the day. It's currently been renovated to the point to a mini campus for college campus. It's right below New Beginnings that's down on the lower campus.
Oh, great. And the other question I have is, how do students find out about this? Or how do young people find out about this? Because you're really sort of targeting students who aren't active students. So how do they find out about this?
And that's a good question, sir. So I am the admissions coordinator. So I partner with Fox 5, DCW 50, who targets wards 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8. We also are on the radio, WPGC, and we just get out there in the streets and we, set up by the metro stations, and we hand out flyers and give information out to the public. A lot has to do with word of mouth from past parents and past cadets that have been successful in the program. Right now, what we're really trying to do is form a partnership with DCPS to be able to act as a vessel for those young men and young women who kind of get lost in between not wanting to go to school and just really falling behind. We're at the door with them, but we just haven't been able to come in. And that's why, again, I'm happy to be invited to this State Board of Education's meeting, because I'm really just looking for the word to get out, because we all know somebody who is dealing with a young man or young woman who has been disengaged.
If I may, this is something that the board's heard before. That bus signage, the signage that's on buses as they're traveling all around the city.
Yes,
is
sir.
a really, really good way for people to find out about information.
And sir, yes, I do have a PO in right now for that.
Great.
It has to get approved by my my budget personnel. So I have that, as well as the bike stop.
Do you partner with OSSI?
Yes, we partner with OSSI, and that's where the young men and young women go down to take their high school diploma test.
Okay, you might see if OSSI has money in their budget for it.
I can sure ask to see.
And I'd like to ask Sergeant Preston, Colonel Rodwell is one of my friends. Is he one of yours too?
Colonel who?
Colonel Rodwell, Roy Rodwell.
The name sounds familiar.
Okay,
probably is.
I don't want to take up the time.
Not a problem. But one of the other things you, Mr. O'Leary, the fact about the notification process. This program for the DC has been in existence since 1993. We have partnered with the Maryland Free State program before we got our own program in 2013. So we're looking at expanding. We do, Ms. Walloon has also been out to, we've been with ANC meetings throughout the course of 5A. We got scheduled plans to go to Ward 7, 8, 6, 4, and the like to get out to the vessel to where the most need is. Also, if you give me an opportunity, Mr. Brown, who is the acting program director for the academy, is online with us in my screen, the lower left-hand corner. But that's what we're doing. We're trying to get the word out, like Mr. Walloon said, by word of mouth, and from cadets who have completed the program has went on to be successful. We have one cadet that graduated from the program who's in the mayor's office. We have some that's serving in the armed forces. We have some who are going back to colleges and becoming an educator. So the word is out there. It's just a crawl, walk, and run concept.
Right.
So, Mr. Brown, if you'd like to say something to the board.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I've been involved with the Challenge Academy for 23 years, and I've seen the growth. I've seen the opportunities. I've seen the students that have been lost. I've also had the pleasure or displeasure of working in a juvenile boot camp as well as the detention center. So there is a difference. We're asking students to volunteer. This is not court appointed. They're not going to be in handcuffs and shackles. We're trying to change a mindset, a behavior. And that's what we're trying to do. So we need this partnership with the schools so that we can give this opportunity to many students that are falling short. This is a helping hand.
Thank you for that, Mr. Brown. Representative Sutter.
Thanks, President Parker. Thank you so much for this presentation, Mr. Walloon. I appreciate it. I have two questions for you. One, how many students do you accept annually into the Challenge Academy?
So pre-COVID, ma'am, we were able to accept up to 140 cadets. Now, due to the COVID requirements and restrictions, we're at 104. We have 2 classes a year, 22 weeks each class.
Great. And the second is really just a request. Would you be willing to share the deck with our staff, with John Paul, so that we can have access to the information and your contact info? I'm thinking in terms of relationships with schools. There are a few folks I'd like to make sure are aware of the Challenge Academy, and would love to have whatever is helpful in terms of reference material to be able to share with schools and other youth serving organizations in Ward 6.
Yes, ma'am, I definitely will. And also we have tours. So if there's anybody who would like to come out and tour the campus and see firsthand the interaction with the cadets and how they go to school on a daily basis, Monday through Friday, and how they live, we can schedule that as well.
Great. I really appreciate that. I think especially coming out of COVID, we know a lot of young people found this year particularly difficult, whether it was the trauma they experienced or difficulty with online learning. And I think there's a real increased need, even over and above what we saw pre-pandemic, for young people to find their place. So I appreciate knowing about this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Representative Patterson.
All right, thank you, President Parker. Most of my questions have been answered at this particular point, either by the questions that Representative O'Leary or Representative Sutter have asked. So I will have a shout out to Sergeant Major Preston, because we've served together many times before and other things on the Veteran Affairs, and we know each other and the HR stuff that my wife does. My wife knows him and loves him very much. So I'll definitely tell her that I saw you this evening.
Well, thank you.
But I do, and likewise, would love to have some information, as Representative Sutter just said, for the mere fact that I do work with a charter school in my professional life during the daytime. And I know a lot of the other charter leaders, and I've heard how you guys talk to DCPS schools, but we also, with 47% of kids attending charter schools, we want to make sure that those who are struggling also at those charter schools have an opportunity to look at your program as well. And also would love to take you up on one of those visits to come out and just walk through the campus. But really thank my colleagues for answering the questions, asking the questions for me that I wanted to get answered. I wanted to know about your capacity, so to speak, where you were located, and how you went about recruiting. But thank you.
Thank you.
Members, are there other questions or Representative Reed?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. We are, I guess, seeing in the city, I know you're different from like youth detention or things of that nature, but we're seeing where high numbers of youth with disabilities, at least documented disabilities, are engaged with alternative forms of education. Can you talk about your supports related to students with identified disabilities or learning?
So we do have, we do accept young men and young women who have IEPs. So we ask that gets sent in during in processing, when they send in the applications, so it can be reviewed by our lead educator to make sure we can accommodate that. We also have young men and young women who take several different medications for depression, for just not being able to be engaged. So we accommodate that as well.
Thank you. I'm happy to hear also like the addition around supports around mental health, because
yes,
I know I had like a little bit of a reaction, because sometimes you hear certain programs and you don't hear about those supports. So I'm glad it seems like you guys have a really well-rounded program, and I'm happy to share information with stakeholders that I engage with.
Yes, the only thing that we challenge with is we want the parents to be forthcoming upfront. And so we are able to accommodate everything that the young men and young women need. So, a parent may be hesitant to say the young man has a learning disability because they feel that it may stop them from being accepted. Same thing with medications. So as long as the parent can be forthcoming with us, we'll do our best to accommodate it. Yeah.
Also, all the cadets in the program have mentors that goes along with them to help them through the process.
Thank you. Members, any other questions or comments? I am not seeing any. I will, just two quick questions. When is the application period for this year's program?
Good question, sir. I'm accepting applications now for the October class.
And so the class will begin in October. And when will you stop receiving or accepting applications?
I usually stop receiving them 2 weeks prior to in-processing.
Gotcha. And then can you remind me of around the age limits of students that are able to participate in this program?
Yes, sir. The age limits are 16 to 18, and they can turn 19 while they're in the program.
16 to 18. So really targeting secondary students that, as Representative Sutter said, we know, especially after a year like this, unfortunately, some of them may need some additional support. So what I will commit to doing is connecting you all personally with Representatives Sutter, Reed, Thompson, and Patterson. And I know Mr. Preston or Sergeant Preston, you're already in touch with many people, but they are the representatives for those respective wards that you mentioned that you're interested in. And Representative O'Leary, sorry, I think I missed. So because you said wards 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
And what we can also do is just learning more about what opportunities might be available at OSSE, as well as through DCPS. And so we can talk offline about strategizing there, but we do appreciate you coming to share with us. And we always have open door to you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
everybody else.
Thanks, everybody. Feel free, we're here to support. I'm a former employee of DC Public Schools back in the day. And I got tired of playing with kids, so I went back in the Army. Have a good evening, y'all.
Have a good
evening.
Members. Members, we are now going to keep going in our meeting. We're going to turn to our student representatives to discuss Student Advisory Committee recommendations. Representatives O'Sullivan and Dale will talk about the Student Advisory Committee's recommended changes to the application process and selection of new representatives. As members will recall, we discussed this briefly at our last working session, and the proposal will be on the agenda for a vote at our May public meeting. So with that, Representative O'Sullivan, as I'm not seeing Representative Dale, I'm going to turn it over to you to share.
All right, thanks, President Parker. John Paul just put the, we kind of revised the recommendations a bit after our first time bringing them up to you all last working session, I believe. And then we had an additional Student Advisory Committee meeting and we got some more feedback. So you can find those right there in the chat. The main updates we made to the recommendations were after you all's feedback about how we are going to go about the maker of a resolution coming to the Student Advisory Committee meeting and presenting that resolution. We changed the wording a bit so it's any other elected board member supportive of the resolution if the maker of the resolution can't come. That of course fills up for debate about what you guys think is best in terms of how we can increase the student voice in that regards to have all of the students on the SAC know what resolutions are going forth, what work the state board is doing, because we do our work on our own, but we also want the students to be more directly involved in the state board legislative process. And then more broadly in the recommendations, we added a paragraph about the SAC recommending that the state board launches sort of like a campaign of sorts to get the word out about what the student representative position does, what the student advisory committee does, and why students should join. So I know in the past, John Paul said that we've sent the application to school principals, and they usually get sent to emails of students. But a lot of SAC members pointed out how oftentimes, you know, stuff that goes to emails, you may not actually read everything. And especially when it's sent by like a counselor, you kind of read through, there are a bunch of things there. You may not actually internalize everything that's being presented to you. So we really want to emphasize that there should be a campaign that would rely on all of us, all the state board members. And I think it can be some in person, whether it's outdoor, like canvassing, whether it is at schools, going to presenting these opportunities to students, but making as many students as possible aware of this application, and also framing it in a positive light so that they know it's exciting work, so that they know this is something you can come to and you can bring your own experiences and you can shape something, that the opportunities are sort of limitless, and you can sort of shape the future of the committee however you want to do so. Because if there's one thing we've heard over the past year in the student advisory committee, is that we don't just want the top performing students academically to join the committee or to be a student representative. We want all the different students in the city represented. And it's really important that all the different students in the city know this is a group for them and know this is a position they can hold. So it's really important, in addition to the changes we are proposing, which are increasing the student representative positions, that there will be 4 each year, with at least 1 east of the river. And again, it would still be sophomores, juniors, and seniors. We want to emphasize the diversity of student representation. So a graduating class, ward, school size, a lot of it will rely on you guys working together to shape a group of student representatives that would best represent the city, but also a group that, you know, isn't just like students that come from maybe just smaller schools, or maybe schools that have notable perform better academically in senses on park exams, whatever it may be. This is really about getting as many different voices as possible in the student representative position. So the burden would fall on you guys to actually get that outreach out there. And when you all are voting on the student representatives to consider, it's really important you guys keep the cohesiveness of the group in your mind, and you guys think about what can actually create the strongest student representative body, and what can help the SAC the most going forward. And so that's pretty much that. SAC members really wanted 4 because they knew that like we need more than 2 right now. We want as many different students represented. And so that's why we have what we have here. I'm happy to answer any questions or go back and forth in a discussion, but this has been something that we've spent some time going over, and it is something that every single SAC member is really adamant about.
Thank you, Representative O'Sullivan, and the subtle or not so subtle reminder that all of the students are behind these recommendations. Members, are there questions? Representative O'Sullivan, I'm sorry, O'Leary.
I'm the other Irish guy. I'd like to ask Alex about, have y'all gotten in touch with my representative on the city council, Janice Lewis George, who used to be the student representative on the old Board of Education? I think she would be a powerful voice in spreading the word, besides our voice on the State Board of Education.
We are not in contact with her, and we actually think that's a great idea, especially when we talk about like a campaign. like interactive and getting the word out, I think that would be a great resource for us. If you would like to, introduce us or create something where she knows about what we're doing and we can get in contact with her, and then hopefully we could provide information, I think that'd be great. So
I will do that.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
I think that's a great idea. I'm also thinking maybe there's room to make a formal invitation to all of the council members to an upcoming student advisory committee meeting so that they can witness the brilliance that we get to see all the time. So good push and recommendation, Representative O'Leary. Vice President Gassoy.
Thank you. Yeah, just piggybacking on Representative O'Leary's recommendation, I was wondering if you were planning to, or maybe you've already done it, like made short videos of you and Shayla, and now maybe some of us and council members talking about, what this is and why it's exciting, all the things you just said, but like in really short little clips. And that of course would depend on some of our staff, but is that something that you've thought about?
Yeah, it definitely was. That explicitly, I think, was brought up in our last SAC meeting about, and I know a lot of board members have had experience with this, but like Instagram Lives is something the state board is really good at, are those videos, or people talking about the importance of it. And I think that's something we really want to emphasize, which is, I think some of this work will be done over the summer really, but trying to get the word out. And we were going to bring this up in the end of the meeting, but I think Shayla led a SAC meeting on Monday with Caitlin about social media. So now that's like officially up and running. I just got an email earlier today with like the login information and stuff. So that's a part of that. So we definitely were thinking along those lines, but yeah, you guys should. Shayla's leading it, so I'm not entirely sure if it has. I'm pretty sure it's an account. I think you guys can ask Caitlin, but if it is, you guys should go follow it. But over the next couple of weeks, we'll be sure to update you all on that.
Cool. Representative Wattenberg.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, so I think I may have figured this out. I'm still on multiple devices, but showing that I am very non-technological. That is also my comment here, Alex, which is, along with all the stuff that you're talking about, will you be able to just provide us, whether you do it or staff does it, with something that's exciting, that conveys everything that you've talked about, that we can put in our newsletters, that we can put on our listservs, that we can put out to the high schools, they can put it out in their newsletters, et cetera, et cetera. So that we can be very aggressive about, and it doesn't depend on changing social distancing and all that, or on our audio working properly.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we can do, and I think in our final report that we submit, hopefully next month we can include something like that, or we can include specific recommendations on what we want it to look like and some ideas. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can stick in photos and maybe videos, I don't know, but make it viable for low tech, but also for high tech. So anyway,
Yeah.
Sounds great. All right.
Representative Sutter.
Thanks. So Alex, I really appreciate these recommendations. I think they're great. I think that having the entire board active in promoting the role of the student rep is really important. In my time on the board, we've had really phenomenal student reps. So the chance to have more, I think, is just a great idea. One question I have about the committee, the proposal that you suggest that the board adopt a policy around resolutions. I love the idea of having student input on those. I want to just make sure I'm understanding how you think through the timeline of making sure, like, when either a committee or a representative might think of a proposal for a resolution, when they would bring it to the SAC, and when it would then be ready to be voted on. Could that all happen within a month, or does that take us to sort of a 2-month process? If you'd help us think through that timeline, it would be helpful for me.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how the process currently is for when you submit a non-ceremonial resolution, but we host our SAC meetings on the second Monday. So ideally, it would be that if they were proposed during the working meeting, you could then come the next week to the SAC on Monday, and then we would think over it, and then we would either vote on it then during the meeting, or we would do some sort of like survey, and then for the public meeting, we would come back and share out what like the student advisory committee's majority opinion was.
Awesome. I appreciate that. That's also really helpful, I think, for folks who are listening in to just hear how that plays into how the members would bring it to the SAC and get your insights into whether there was full support or qualified support for it. Thanks so much.
Of course.
I am not seeing other questions or comments. Representative Thompson had a question about timeline. And Mr. Hayworth responded that we're holding off on launching applications until we vote on this process. Representative O'Sullivan, I will just echo what everybody else said. I'm just truly thankful for your work, Representative Dale's work, as well as the Student Advisory Committee. And I'm excited for there to be more members. Two quick questions. One is about the staggering of members with the four. Did you all ever, and I'm sorry, I can't seem to open the link that was dropped in the chat, but how did you all decide to help stagger the positions?
Yeah, so what we did is we didn't set like a requirement on how many sophomores, juniors versus seniors, because there is something to be said about like, you know, the current SAC members do want the ability to like in the case that there are like qualified applicants who really want it, if you have 3 juniors who want to do it and you guys think the 3 juniors would put us in the best place, would put the committee and the student representative body in the best place, then we don't want to say like, oh, you can't do that necessarily. But it should be something you consider when all of you guys, and something we want is we want for you guys, I'm pretty sure in the past you guys vote individually, but something we want is for you all to talk about it together, go through these applicants and figure out what would make the strongest group. And the graduating class should be something that you consider, I think, pretty heavily. We didn't want to make any specific requirements on it, especially because it may be sort of difficult and who knows what's actually best, because you could say like, oh, we want 2 seniors, but maybe the 2 seniors aren't very like prepared, don't have enough time. So it is sort of like a case-by-case situation on when it would be best. But the idea is that you all would factor it in addition to like the short answer question responses that you all receive, and look at what people can offer and think about also how the SAC would function going forward. Like it probably isn't smart to have like 3 seniors and then like 1 sophomore or 1 junior or something, and it may not put the SAC in the best place. And it probably isn't smart to have 4 new student representatives, for example, because the idea is that there could be some continuity and change, but also a structure within the committee so that when some goes, there's someone already waiting in the wings to take over, or there's someone or members who can like have a mentoring role to the other ones, something so that when a senior graduates or if a student representative doesn't want to go for a second term, that they will be in a good position because there's someone who is younger but maybe has gotten a year to experience it, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. That makes a lot of sense. One other quick point, or 2 quick plugs, I would say. I would hope, for the sake of continuity, but also just given the work that has been done, that you and Representative Dale will consider reapplying again. And I'm trying to be cautious of what I say so as to not tilt the scale, but I think the board would be well served, as well as the Student Advisory Committee. And the last point I would just make, in terms of a compromise on the student voice and members coming to the Student Advisory Committee, I really appreciate what I see as a compromise and the thoughtfulness of you all taking the feedback that was given. If I could just make one more simple ask for compromise, just based on what you shared with Representative Sutter, I like the change that either the person that introduced the resolution or someone that supports it would come. I think that gives a little bit more flexibility. If at all possible, would you all would recommend or be okay with students at least voting in that meeting, that would then give clarity leading up to the public meeting, so that we wouldn't be in a situation of not knowing where the student representatives feel until the meeting of, if that makes sense. I don't know, but we could talk offline. But if there was any way to have that vote in the Student Advisory Committee meeting versus having it lag on, I think that would be great.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah, but I do agree that student voice is really important. And again, appreciate that compromise. Okay, members, I am not seeing any other requests for questions here. So we will take this up for a vote at our coming public meeting. Thanks again, Representative O'Sullivan. We will now turn to our committee reports. Each committee will have 10 minutes to share. You certainly don't have to take that full time. I'm going to ask staff to run a clock just to keep us honest here. And in no particular order, I'm going to first ask the Assessment and Accountability Committee to share.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And we can hear you on time. We got you. Let's go.
All right. So as you know, Representative Patterson and I co-chair this. So our plan is I'm going to give you the initial presentation, and then he is going to subtract, correct, add, chime in, etc. So a couple things. I want to say something about our timeline, and I want to talk about our engagement program. First of all, going back, I forget if it was last meeting or the one before, but initially we had talked about voting on these recommendations about how we might want to change, improve the STAR framework in July. We have figured out that we can still get this to OSSE in time for them to make the recommendations to the Education Department if we vote in September. So that will give us more breathing room. But I want to be clear, it's really breathing room for all of us to be talking with our constituents, hearing from people perhaps at that August meeting. We still intend as a committee to do everything that we had said earlier, which is work with you to have very high public engagement in June, pull together the research that everybody here feels they need to make good decisions, and prepare a set of recommendations that will be available to you in July and available publicly in July, so that, you know, people can be thinking about it, talking about it, figuring it out. They may change before we come together in September at a working meeting to do a vote, but that's still the plan. So one, I want to say that. Second, let me just say about the engagement plan. You should have received it, today's Wednesday, I think on Monday maybe, or Sunday. I also resent it to everybody by email about half an hour ago. And you can look at it, but you'll see the gist is we want to do surveying of teachers, principals, and parents in particular. We're going to do some interviewing of principals because we think they're so critical to this. How does the STAR framework work at a school? What is the effect that it has? We want to, we'll probably have some folks at a state board meeting to talk about it. Ward meetings, where we assume most people are going to want to have some kind of formal meeting with their constituents in June. That sort of June is the target month for everything, for the surveying, for the ward meetings, and so on. As a committee, we're going to provide you what things that will help you do this. We're going to provide kind of a presentation, an engaging, fun, interesting presentation that you can use at meetings. We will be providing surveys. The board will be pushing out some of them, you know, if it's for teachers or principals because they have lists. But we also really want to push it out to parents, and we hope that everybody here will be pushing it out through their newsletters and all of their different tools. And yeah, I guess that's mainly what I want to say. Yeah.
Okay, and I appreciate that. We've been talking a lot about the timeline. I know that I've talked to many of you about that individually to make sure that we're respectful of your time and also of the staff. And so we're going to continue to try to make sure that we are considerate of those type of things. We do not want to monopolize the staff times. We are very cognizant that there are more committees than just our committee, and that there are individuals that may be out or stuff like that. So as Ruth and I move forward, one of the major things that we're trying to do is trying to get some clarity from the Department of Education and from OSSE as to how receptive they are to our timeline and what we're doing, allow it to have the integrity that we'd like it to have, but sincerely just working with this group here and making sure we're respectful of everybody and all the work that's being put in on all the committees.
Okay, members, questions? Representative Thompson.
Okay, I'm in one meeting now, so that's helpful. I took a look at the engagement plan. It's a lot, and I like a good engagement plan. I know I like a good engagement plan. I am a little concerned that it has the right spirit, but I'm concerned that we may that in reality the execution is not going to be what we want. So like when I think about what I hear from my constituents, having just come out of a civic association meeting, I doubt that they would make the time to come to a STAR meeting in June. And I really want their input, but I don't think that's what they're going to be thinking about in June. And I think there's a bunch of stuff that's going to be happening in June. And people are fatigued in May and June in any year when it's not a pandemic year. And so I shared with Representative Wattenberg, she knows this, that I personally think that the STARS need some help. I don't think they accomplish what in my opinion they were set out to accomplish, which is being helpful to families and saying like, this is the place that I want for my kid and it's the best place and I have all the information I need to make that decision, that's what parents do, that's their job. So I'm with that. And making sure that for people who are holding schools accountable and thinking about what investments we need to make there, it's not as meaningful as we would like it to be either. And so I have a desire for something meaningful, more or at least more meaningful than what we have. And I'm really concerned about just the ability and capacity to get the engagement that I would want to see for something new. I'm really excited about the energy around working to something new, but I'm also a little concerned about everything in May and June.
All right, let me take one shot at responding to that.
Representative Wattenberg, if you wouldn't mind, I know the clock is running. Can we get Vice President Gasoyan, and then that way you can respond to everything?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Vice President Gasoyan.
Thank you, and it's related. I guess while you were speaking, Representative Thompson, I was thinking, I wonder, and I'm just thinking out loud here, so it's something for you to consider, Representative Wattenberg. If we framed it as an invitation for constituents who are interested and as excited for this topic as we are, those of us who are, right, like who want something meaningful, to use your language, which I like and I agree, Representative Thompson. So I wonder if it's something that could be more engaging, if it's, you know, something that's, you put out an invitation in advance now and people know it's coming in June, and they are folks who are thinking about it. So anyway, it's just a thought, if you think that might make a difference.
Representative Wattenberg, feel free to weigh in. Oh, there's one more question. Representative Sutter.
Thank you, President Parker. Yeah, I'm just gonna share, because Representative Wattenberg saw this feedback, as did members of the committee, but not members of the board writ large, that I raised almost every concern that Representative Thompson just raised in my written feedback when our committee was considering it, for the same reasons. And I was thinking today about how I would boil it down, that like, I support revisions to the STAR. I think this framework is thoughtful and contains all the components I would hope a truly engaging public process would contain. And I worry that given the deeply compressed timeline, 6 weeks essentially, we are not doing honor to the rigor of the process designed or to the importance of the changes we want to see. That it would perhaps disrespect the process that we really care about making one that folks really feel like is engaging. So I just wanted to share that I echo the concerns I've heard, and I shared them with Representative Wattenberg before it was sent to the board.
And
So-
we only have 25, so this is what we're gonna do. I'm gonna yield 5 minutes for a continued conversation here. So we'll take that from the reopen task force, which we had allotted 20 minutes. So now that will be 15 minutes. So John Paul, if you could just restart the clock to 5 minutes, and then we will move on to the next committee report.
Okay, and I'll,
Representative Wattenberg.
okay.
And right
and
after
I'll
she
be quick,
responds,
and
I have
then-
something to
and
say
then-
as well. Go right ahead,
Yeah.
Representative.
No, good. All right. So what I want to say, and I think this is actually in response in part to what Representative Sutter said in the committee, is it's not just June. It's June, July, and August for the vote in September. Now, if people want to say that's not enough, we can go back and revisit this. But it seems to me that we're trying to do a balance here of really getting the engagement we want, and also trying to keep on a timeline that is going to allow us to really change the nature of the STAR framework before it gets used again, which and this is kind of technical and detailed, and it's not even completely confirmed, but we expect the next likely time it would be used would be December 2023. And if we don't want that, we have to move. So the question is how to balance that, right? And so I think with this, and I like Emily's idea to sort of get people thinking about it now, think about a focus, and let me say this differently than I did last time, a focused effort in June, or maybe we'll have everything available for you in June as a way to think about it. And then people have June, July, August, and early September to engage in this. And so that's what I would put out there. And if people really find it inadequate, you know, we would have to shift the timeline, but that could have consequences. So to my co-chair.
And real quick, President Parker and my peers, the main thing that we need to do is right now is really get some clarity, as I said in my statements, around what OSSE is thinking around timeline as far as they're addressing it. I think that's really one of the major sticking points, and what they hear back, and what Darren, I believe, is working with us at this particular time, because Alex may be out during this time, is to find out what the Department of Education also comes out with. That really kind of sets how much time do we have or we don't have. I know our focus is trying to make sure, as Representative Robert Wattenberg has said, that if we can not use the old edition, as I'm calling it now, the current one, but we really need to find out exactly some clarity around timing from both OSSE and from the Department of Education as we talk about what's going to be the parameters around engagement. Because I agree 100% with Representative Thompson that, and specifically because we live east of the river, engagement is difficult. It's very difficult, and it's really meeting people where they are, who are the most impacted by this, because the ones that receive the lowest stars are predominantly in our communities. along with Dr. Reed. So we want to make sure that we do have the opportunity to have them to chime in. And so that's going to determine how much do we really have, is those type of things. And so I would, as I said to Representative Wattenberg, I hope that once we get that, we can kind of really finalize how much time we really do have, knowing what our objectives and goals are, and get that back to you guys.
Can I ask a question? So I don't, and forgive me if I'm missing something. So I think I understand it as our expectation is to encourage OSSE not to have stars on report cards this year. We're not going to have tests, so I would assume we wouldn't use the old stars. And then we would also push, and I think we should be pushing for new stars. I want to be clear about that, like not new stars, but a new something else, something that is more reflective of what's happening in schools, because I think that is our end goal. I really do, and I probably have some comments from new business, and I'm happy to engage with Representative Wattenberg and other members of the committee offline because I'm not on this committee. But like, I really do have concerns about the capacity to do outreach in Ward 7. Like, I get that everybody, wards are equal as far as people. They're not equal as far as challenges, and they're not equal as far as number of families we have to reach. And Carlene is the only other person with more families and possibly more challenges. And so I know that we have an equity statement. I believe beyond a statement, we have an equity imperative. And I have too many families that are going into lotteries. I have too many families that are traveling outside of their neighborhoods. I have too many families who can't just look at their school and go across the street. So like what shows up on those report cards is super meaningful for the families I represent. So I want to make sure that we're working not just towards something that serves them, but we're working towards something that they see themselves in, because that is most important. And I really am pushing for us to create a process that allows that.
Thank you. Well, let me just say, I hear that we will, as Representative Patterson said, we're also going to be getting some more feedback on the timeline. So we will try to work with you clearly to try to figure out what could work. And if that means, if the only way to do it is extending it and delaying what happens on the other end, that's what we have to do. So, you know, we'll work with you on that.
And right before we move to the Education Standards Committee, just quick question, point of privilege. Representative Wattenberg, Representative Patterson, is it safe to say that you're saying the engagement starts in June and would go through September, not that the engagement is just happening in June?
That is correct.
That is what I'm hearing you say.
That is what.
Got it.
At the current time, that's what we're saying. We do want to talk somewhat, and Ruth, you can add to this aspect in the September meeting of where we are with engagement, but that's what we're saying right now.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We would have everything ready for people to be involved in engagement in June as part of what we're saying. The other thing that people should know is we're already, the two of us, and we'll be expanding this, are beginning outreach to stakeholder groups to start making presentations, to sort of really consult with, I would say, sort of the leadership of different stakeholder groups to start engaging them, to also start thinking about how are you going to engage your people, what do you need from us, et cetera, et cetera.
Got it. Thank you. We're now going to move to the Education Standards Committee and turn it over to Representative Sutter.
Great. Thank you so much, President Parker. The Education Standards Committee met last Wednesday, and we spent most of our time in a working session talking through a few aspects of the committee's work. If you remember, our work plan had a series of exploratory topics. We have literacy work, we have the social studies work, which is ongoing, and those are sort of the buckets of work we talked about. So we spent a lot of time discussing exploratory topics and how best to engage in those right now. One of those is this question around homeschooling. We had seen an increase in homeschooling in the district during the COVID pandemic and wanted to get insights on who was homeschooling, what families wanted to say about the process, as well as what role the state board has in state homeschooling standards because it's in our purview, it's in our legislative language, but it's not something our board has taken up in quite a long time. And if this is something families might continue to engage in, we wanted to consider that. So we talked about the possibility of putting homeschooling on a public meeting agenda, and we added that to the meeting suggestion list. We also talked about the idea of this different learning modalities during COVID, and we thought that maybe that might be nicely done in conjunction with the COVID recovery committee. And so want to talk more once we hear back from the principal survey about whether there's discussion about digital learning and other learning modalities during COVID. Of course, my Google account just signed me out. So give me 1 second while I sign back in so I can keep looking at the plan here. Okay, cool, we're back in. Then we talked about our literacy plan. OSSE is writing a statewide literacy plan. And one of the things the committee would like to do as part of that is map out the various different literacy providers in the city, all the nonprofits and other associated organizations that are part of the work of literacy. And we talked about how best to do that. So in our committee readout, which should be up on Assembly now, you can see all the details about the conversation we had. But Alistair sent out to folks a draft survey and asked for our feedback. I think we're at the point now where that's gone out to the members of the committee. It'll then go out to members of the board, and then we'll seek to start collecting information on who the providers are in the city. So more on that to come. We also spent a lot of time talking about an ethnic studies panel. This was an idea that Representative Chang had brought to the committee. It came out of concerns around the anti-AAPI hate incidents, but also a larger concern over making sure that our students really get to see themselves in the history and social studies they are taught in a way that folks our age and older did not. So we talked about how to do that. We've also proposed a panel, an ethnic studies panel for a public meeting, and that's in the meeting suggestion list. Alistair also requested, or planned to request, I think he did, of the Student Advisory Committee, a chance to come speak to our students about that at the at their May meeting. And he and I plan to attend that meeting so we can hear feedback from students about how they're thinking about what they're learning in their social studies courses, what they'd like to be learning, and how we might use some sort of a panel or event to better gather information, with a final product being some sort of recommendations to the standards committee aligned with the guiding principles so that they could be incorporated there. The reason we did that is we've heard pretty loudly and clearly from OSSE's writing committee as well as OSSE's staff that the 4-course graduation requirements for social studies and the sequence, World 1, World 2, US, civics, and government and DC history, are not going to change in the standards revision. So there's not an opening to add in a new graduation requirement. So thinking about how we could incorporate any sort of studies into the standards themselves, rather than into some sort of new graduation requirement. We also talked at length during that about Kenyon McDuffie's bill, about Black history and cultural studies, about the position the board has taken on that bill in the past, largely around our concerns about council legislating graduation requirements, given the purview of the board on that. To that end, we also talked about Councilmember White's proposed financial literacy bill, and where that might fall into the committee's interests or responding to that bill. It does not currently have a hearing scheduled, but should it get a hearing scheduled, how we might respond to that. And then finally, we talked about the social studies standards updates. The OSSE Technical Writing Committee work is ongoing. They had their most recent meeting tonight at 4 o'clock. I was there for the first hour. They're still talking about the standards framework. And I think you'll all appreciate this. The big theme of the meeting was cognitive dissonance, and all the ways in which folks in the room might have to challenge their own preconceived notions about the social studies standards as they examine how to write the revision. We do not have any numeric budget requests. Our main request is that we might need something from the state board budget to deal with the literacy plan, but we don't have a hard number on that. So that, I think, is the synopsis of our committee's work. Happy to take any questions or let other members of the committee who have thoughts chime in.
You members, are there any questions or comments? Representative Reed and then Representative O'Sullivan.
I'll just chime in quickly to just mention and plug the work around homeschooling and then digital learning, just because I think the board should be considering the lasting effects of the pandemic and the choices that families are considering making after. I think we're talking a lot about innovation and education, and I'm not sure if our current system is really, I think our families are moving at a faster pace around innovation than our system is at the moment. And what that could lend to is, families taking choices of, keeping their children home. But then I'm also watching a lot of talk about digital learning and full online schools, and then also seeing some negative pieces of it, of organizations taking opportunities around taking funds, closing online schools. So with all that said, I'm just kind of thinking like we should probably get ahead of a possible, not issue, but just a possible shift in what education in DC might look like. Not saying it's going to be a huge shift, but I would hate for individuals to take two options and then the city not be prepared to fully support them. So that's kind of where that is coming from, because I know there's some sentiments around homeschooling and online learning in full. So I just wanted to plug that. I'm hearing from a variety of parents who are interested in taking different options, and I think the board should be prepared and lead the city in fully embracing those options.
Parents are innovating faster than our system is. I think that was very well put. Thank you for that push. Representative O'Sullivan.
Thank you, President Parker. I just want to highlight the efforts from Representative Sutter and Chang, and I look forward to you guys coming to our meeting on Monday. And I think Representative Wattenberg and Patterson will be there as well to present some of the things that they've got going on. So it's going to be a jam-packed meeting, but we're looking forward to having you guys.
Awesome. The only thing I would add around the ethnic studies piece, I think it goes without saying that I think it's really important. However, I think it's important that we are consistent in our stances. I know where we came out on the proposed legislation that Councilmember McDuffie put forward. And my only concern with having an official panel on ethnic studies is that it might engender further conversation or give the impression that we are entertaining the thought of adapting graduation requirements by adding an ethnic studies course. And so I wonder if that's the right form, or if we could use the working session, or maybe even a social studies advisory committee. But we can talk offline there. But I do want us to just be consistent, because as you said, Representative Sutter, it is our understanding that OSSE is not open to adapting those graduation requirements. So we just want to be clear and manage expectations.
Agree. I'll use the last 40 seconds. I definitely want to make sure Representative Chang is involved in that conversation. And I know he's not with us tonight, so we'll make sure that that happens. I do want to circle back on what Representative Reed offered and put a note in again. We put requests to have panels in the public meeting suggestions list. So I think if leadership could take a look at that and find a time for it, because I agree, I think I'd like to take that quote from Representative Reed and put it as a stamp on this year about families innovating faster than our system. So would love to have a panel that can address some of those questions and concerns soon.
Yes, will happen. And thank you for flagging your budget request. I am realizing that we did not get to the budget request for the Assessment and Accountability Committee. And so I saw earlier Representative Thompson was willing to yield some time. I'm not sure how much, but but if we could say to Representative Wattenberg and Patterson, if you could take 3 minutes to just characterize your, you have 10 minutes, Representative Thompson. But again, I will take it for now from the, I will take it from the reopen committee's work. But if you all could take 3 minutes to just characterize your budget requests. I know there was some clarifications and pushback. So just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page there.
So I think all we're, can you hear me? Yes. So all we are hoping for is some amount of money. I don't think it's a lot for the design and production of hard copy materials, whether it's surveys to go out in some places, some flyers explaining the process. And then, you know, if there's money to, you know, have some technical consultants on some of this early survey stuff, just to help make sure it's representative, that's a plus. But I think we all, you know, I think of these early surveys much more as, you know, y'all come. The more interest we can get and the more responses we'll get, we'll learn a lot from it. That's the main thing. And you can do that in-house. And then we're very supportive of the, you know, a joint board survey in the fall on multiple issues, but definitely including this in August, I think is what we're talking. Is that?
So I'm hearing you say
capture?
Some consulting and then the survey is essentially the request.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And
Got
the
it.
consulting, I would say it's very it's
Minimal.
discretionary. It's not required.
Right.
Got it. Thank you.
Representative Patterson, anything to?
No, that sums it up, and I'm gonna give back that minute and a half. I was trying to get back the whole minute and a half, but there you go. Okay.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. We are going to move on to our teacher practice committee. Representative O'Leary.
Good evening, everyone. If I take 10 minutes, it'll be a world's record. We are continually working on trying to help teachers and trying to find out why teachers are not being successful and how they can be successful. The Mary Levy report the board is moving forward with the report. It will focus on the 2019-2020 teacher attrition and retention data. The staff is currently working through the procurement process and anticipates the report will be delivered by June 30th. It's going to cost $6,000. And it was well worth it the last two times. I'll talk a little bit about this school year in a minute. We brainstorm more systemic proposals to improve literacy through the community's work, especially since the April public meeting panel was very insightful. We also talked about how OSSE would be presenting its proposed rulemaking on educator preparation programs, the one that we just heard about. Alistair and I talked offline to come up with a literacy plan for the committee. That was mentioned with the other committee. I'm sure it will overlap a little bit with that. We are thinking to advocate for the implementation of professional development that will provide K-5 teachers with deep knowledge to be literacy and language experts. We could ask for this training to be included in the statewide literacy plan, for instance. And if you don't know what DINR means, it means Declaration of Intent to Not Return. All teachers who are have to fill out a form if they are deciding that they're not going to return to the system. We tried to get information from DCPS about that. We got information from DCPS about that. I don't think it's that helpful. So we're going to keep pushing to try to get information about, to me, it would be very important for us to know how many teachers have decided by now, because they have to submit it in April, that they're not coming back. Figures last year were sort of skewed because of the virus, and I'm sure they'll be skewed again this year. And since the mayor has planned to open all schools in August, because the numbers are dropping, they're not dropping precipitously, they're just going down a little bit, but things will be different. And the reopening committee will talk more about that. That's all I got.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions or comments?
Now, I'd like to have at least a question.
Well, I was going to say I have two questions. So one
Okay,
is
ask the question, Zach. You don't have to tell me you have them. Just ask.
one budgetary is the teacher retention report the only budget ask?
Yes.
And then two, are beyond just the retention issue, is this year's report looking at anything different?
What do you mean? You mean the Mary Levy report?
Yes.
No, the Mary Levy report will be so that we can compare the 2 years that we had before.
That's right. And what I remember from the past 2 years was that about a quarter of teachers were leaving. We had among, if not the highest turnover in the country. It was a slight improvement. And this year will allow us to see if that trend continues or it dips back down.
What I've heard is that the numbers for 2019, 2020 unofficially are kind of sort of like the numbers in 2018, 2019.
Gotcha. Helpful.
Of course, it's a big difference because of the virus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, you've got 5 minutes to give to the next panel.
Thank you. So generous, so generous. We are now going to move on to the Advocacy and Outreach Committee. Dr. Reed, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm hoping not to need Fraser's 5 minutes, but thank you, Dr. So generous. So the Advocacy and Outreach Committee, or Outreach Advocacy Committee, met on April 9th and April 30th. And from these meetings, we established a process for vetting outreach and advocacy efforts, as well as addressing resolutions that needed some follow-up from 2020. We identified, let me see, feedback. I'm not sure who the 202 number is. Well, everyone probably does. 320-784, you might need to mute. But SR 2040 related to homeless youth. What else? Support around retention and recruitment of Latinx teachers, supporting students with disabilities, supporting teacher retention in our schools, supporting measures to increase recruitment and retention of African-American teachers, recognizing the importance of removing all police from public schools, which, yes, yep, that was one. And then the STAR framework, which is one that I'm going to, as a member of the Assessment Accountability Group, flag for them. So those were the resolutions that we scanned through from 2020 that I just want to go back through to make sure the board kind of puts a nice clean bow or does what we either say we were going to do in those resolutions. The next part of that was the board discussed a process for handling outreach and advocacy efforts, which I have drafted. I just want to make it a little prettier before sending it to members to review. But basically, we just want a fair process for how we address advocacy efforts in about 4 different areas. One being when an area of advocacy is proposed by a board member. 2, when testimony is received from public hearings. 3, yearly actions that the board should be taking. And then 4, just kind of a blanket statement on how emergency situations could possibly be handled or just to address. So I will push it out to the board soon. I just want to, the steps are in place. It's just, it doesn't look nice and clean for y'all yet. After the discussion, though, we had several questions, and those are, which I think we can possibly either address during a retreat or just in some conversation. But, you know, when does the board take on an issue? What tools do we have at our disposal? And how do we differentiate from award versus board advocacy? Are just some questions that floated around in our conversation that just might be worth conversations with the full board. Other than that, we still have, we plan to, I guess, address creating an advocacy agenda. And then lastly, given some of the current events, I guess, getting more into depth about like areas of outreach and advocacy. We want to invite the Social Justice Project and possibly AJE to an advocacy and outreach committee meeting as like panelists to discuss two kind of floating issues. One being the number of students at DYRS who haven't received services, and then the fact that 100% of our students engaged at DYRS have disabilities, which is alarming for me. And then we do want to follow up on the situation related to, busing and the police being called. So we figured those would be the two agencies to possibly have a panel with, and it will match nicely, possibly too, with one of the resolutions that around policing in school that the board unanimously last year. So that's my report. Does anyone from the committee want to chime in? Any questions?
Great report.
It was a great report. Representative Sutter seems to have a question.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I hate to make you have more time, but so I know I'm going to bring up a topic tonight in new business that I think might intersect with your committee. And one question I have is sort of like, is that an acceptable way to address new advocacy issues for the board? Or is there another path that the committee would prefer we take?
Yeah, I was debating if I wanted to go through the steps, but I'll give a sneak peek of that. So we were suggesting when a board member an individual board member has an area for advocacy, that the issue is raised from a board member during a public meeting or working session. So you already checked one box, Representative Sutter. Then the Advocacy and Outreach Committee will be sure to discuss or deliberate that at one of our public forums. So basically, we just want to make sure that we're not deliberating anything outside of the public knowing. We love to be transparent. While we're deliberating, the committee will assess, the connection to board responsibilities. Representative Thompson mentioned mission drift, but we want to just make sure, does it align with our website, our bylaws, our equity statement, and the connection to hopefully our developed advocacy agenda. After we do that, we'll provide a recommendation to the board or the member about what we kind of felt. So it could be, this is something the board, we feel like we should take on. We feel like we should issue a resolution. We feel like this member should take this to their ward, so that's kind of the proposed 4 steps that we'll go through. But I'll count this, since we're still we're building this plane while flying, as whatever you mentioned in the new business section as step 1.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. That's really helpful.
I'm not seeing other comments or questions. I do have a thought and a question. One thought is, as we're thinking about the process for panels and topics, and I'm a person that loves checks and balances and distributing leadership. I just wonder the role of the advocacy committee in determining those topics. And so if you all are thinking about advocacy and issues to promote, would it make sense that that committee would have a say in what we talk about at our monthly meetings? Just food for thought as we debate it at our upcoming meeting. And then the question I would just have is around like scope and capacity. So obviously we have a lot going on from other committees, and members are on multiple committees. How have you all entertained the thought of like capacity? Because I know you mentioned several things, but I'm like, oh, do we have the capacity to do all of that and do it well?
That's our fear. I think, if I'm assessing that correctly, Fraser, Emily, and Ebony Rose. So we try to, I guess, delegate where possible. I see Ebony Rose has her hand up, so I'm gonna let you jump in because I have a feeling you're about to save me. Are you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have some, so I don't know a better way than to be as frank as possible, because I think it's clear. I think we as a board have some muscles to build around advocacy. And one of the reasons we flagged this for the retreat is so we can have some shared expectations around, like, when do we take things on? What are the tools in our toolkit? And it's not like something goes into the advocacy committee and then like we have a discussion and like we don't actually have a shared ownership of like what is prioritized or like how we make decisions. And so we both want to have a transparent process, as Representative Reed laid out, as far as like how do you refer things to the advocacy committee, but also just have some clear or shared criteria feels too stringent of a word, but a shared sense of like when do we take things on, and like how do we do that together?
What I'm hearing you say is it's not a matter of just what members want, but setting some shared expectations, criteria, like you said, to filter what might be nice for us to take on versus the things we actually will commit staff capacity and board members' time to.
Yeah, we need to, just like we're setting board priorities. I mean, it's always a prioritization process. It's always a negotiation, and the things we take on as a board should reflect our board priorities. And we want to make sure that as a committee, we're supporting that, and we're moving toward our goals as a board.
I agree.
What happens too is that we may see something, talk about something that, well, we shouldn't be working on this with the advocacy committee, that another committee should be, so we'll get the information to them about that. So it's both ways.
I see.
When Dr. Reed was sharing, I was thinking about the teacher data legislation, and I was like, oh, would that live in the teacher practice committee? Would that live in the advocacy committee? But that's an example, I think, where there could be some shared work around pushing something like that forward. To your point, Representative Oliver.
I saw Representative raise her hand.
And Weidenberg.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Have you heard me the whole time? I don't know.
Yes.
Anyway, okay, I'm fine. Two things. One is, you know, as you say that, I just, in terms of what we take on and not take on, is just to think about, there are ways we can take priorities on that are big, and there are ways we can do things that are little. And just to sort of be able to tier that, like, it's very important. Sometimes we all put our name on a letter. It's not a lot of work. It gets done, and it actually has an impact. That's an important thing. It's a short timeline and very different from the other things, but we want to do both. And wait, what was the very last thing someone said?
I don't know, but I'm going to ask that you drop it in the chat because we're out of time.
Okay,
Sorry,
I'm done.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to our board governance committee and turn it over to Representative Thompson.
All right, so I'm going to use my 8.5 minutes wisely. So the board governance committee met on April 9th. We actually have a scheduled upcoming meeting for May 14th. We are drafting a set of guiding questions, which I am delinquent, sorry, committee members, which will also be shared for the board, with the board for larger input. One of the things we're trying to do at this stage is to orient our committee in the past and present of education governance in DC. And we have a few activities that align with that. So we have, of course, a budgetary request around beginning a relevant lit review with the support of either some graduate students or contractor, but we're willing to negotiate. Gathering context from expert witnesses. So we started a list of some of the witnesses we would like to hear from, and welcome suggestions from the larger board. If you have recommendations, and I'm happy to kind of send some, how we're thinking about what constitutes expert in the subject area, you can email me. Time will be allotted at some of our future committee meetings first for some expert panels, and we'll likely make some recommendations later for it to be shared with the whole board. And then finally, as reflected in our work plan, so people have a sense, the committee discussed releasing a preliminary report in early fall. I will pause to see if I'm missing anything from my committee members. All right, sounds like our hearts and minds are clear at the moment. Do we have any questions or comments?
Members, any questions, comments? Representative Wattenberg.
Just a note, because it's relevant to this, is that, one of the other big cities that has mayoral control that has been looking at alternatives is Chicago, and it was just announced that the mayoral control appointed chancellor is leaving, and the assumption is that they're going to move to an elected board. So just relevant to our discussions, because it may create other discussions.
Representative
I don't know why
Wattenberg.
Representative Patterson is laughing, but okay, or chuckling, but okay.
He's laughing at me because I said all hearts and minds are clear.
Oh,
It's a church saying, and so it just kind of just struck a spirit.
Not just a church saying, it's a Black Baptist church saying.
Exactly. So when she said all heart, it just kind of struck me as such.
Yeah.
My apologies on that.
No worries. And as a Black Catholic, I said amen. So there.
I do have a question about how are you all thinking about those expert panels and the community engagement piece. So it totally makes sense that you would invite experts to your committee, and then we would have some as a board panel. Thinking about the conversation we just had a little while ago with Representative Wattenberg and the time commitment and public engagement, like how are you all thinking about that piece?
Yeah, so that's not necessarily in this report, but is in our larger work plan. So for us, the first thing we wanted to do was just some foundation setting. As far as like, when we say expert witnesses, we mean people who can speak to giving context around what the city looked like in the previous iterations of school governance, people who were part of the decision-making when it came to the shift, and people who have been part of the decision-making since. So for example, on our list of expert witnesses is Councilmember Grasso, because he's chaired the Ed Committee. Or our list of expert witnesses is my current council member, the former mayor, Vincent C. Gray, who clearly has an informed and unique perspective. Or Dr. Heather Harding, who led the PARA report and actually, did all the research, interviewed stakeholders. So as a foundation setting to say like, okay, look, this is where we've been, this is where we are. And that way that'll help us inform as we start to roll out to public engagement. Our committee meetings are, of course, like technically people could watch. I'm sure people are like, you know what, it's must-see TV, that board governance committee meeting. But we plan to use it literally as foundational and to be able to refer back. And then we actually have, at this phase, we're not yet doing public engagement. So this is our information gathering session. So for consulting people, phase 0 of the project.
So just to make sure I'm clear, that preliminary report then would be just based on the experts that you engage with.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's a clearer question. So that is a larger report that will involve some engagement. But I'm just saying we made the decision that we will have a report in early fall, given some of the things that are happening in the world, but it is not our final report, it's a preliminary report. So we are expecting actually multiple windows of engagement. So we'll have one window of engagement that kind of shapes our preliminary report. We'll then have a second window of engagement so people can tell us if the report was good, bad, ugly, or otherwise. For people who are familiar with or were familiar with like the student assignment and boundary process, I was a committee member on that. One of the things I learned from that is that people will engage if you ask them. B, they don't necessarily trust that once you engage them, that their feedback has gone into something meaningful until you show them. And 9 times out of 10, if they can respond to something concrete, they'll tell you exactly what they meant and what they want to see. We think that's particularly important here because governance can be an abstract concept. And a lot of the stakeholders who are most affected by this are stakeholders who particularly are distrustful of the system. And so us making sure that we're doing our due diligence and not just including and interpreting what they have to say, but then going back and say, hey, like, did I hear this correctly? We think it's really important because there is an education component to this too, like for us and for them.
That's right. Super clear. Thank you for that. I would just also plug my predecessor, Mark Jones. I'm sure he's already on your list or maybe on your list, but he would
Mark Jones is on the list.
Yes,
yep.
He would be someone great to talk to for that expert perspective.
He went through several iterations of the board in its governance, when it was a zone, when it was a ward, different iterations.
Yes, thanks to Representative Patterson as well for that suggestion. He was like, we have to talk to Mark Jones. So thank you, Representative Parker. We're on the same page.
Yes, love that, love that. Well, thank you all. Not seeing any other comments or questions. Thank you, Representative Thompson. I am going to now move to Vice President Gasoy to share from the Administrative Committee.
Okay, this is going to be the shortest report yet this evening. The first item of business last week when we met, I think it was last week, was Mr. Hayworth reported that there was one FOIA request filed this month, but that the information that the it's not information that we actually have. So we don't have to do anything about it. Done, check. All right, and then the committee, the other bullet that I have here was already addressed in President Parker's remarks at the beginning. We discussed the proposed revised summer meeting schedule and having a actual break. So that was, you already know about that. And then the third thing you also already know about, because we discussed your committee reports, and Mr. Hayworth, after we hashed everything out, said, let's just try to do everything. So that's what we're doing. We're going to try to make our money stretch, our funding stretch, and see if we can do all of the projects that are proposed, and make it work in terms of staff time and funding for all of the projects you propose that need funding. Am I missing anything from my fellow admin committee members? Okay, and then I would just add, I guess, up next, when we meet next week, we will talk about the idea that Dr. Reed raised regarding possibly having panels be part of our working meetings. And Dr. Reed has provided a little more information about her thinking on that. So we'll have something to work with. So thank you for that, Dr. Reed. And that's it.
Awesome. And Mr. Hayworth wants to add something quickly as an addendum to the administrative report.
So members, this is not necessarily, has not been discussed necessarily at the admin committee, but I do think it's one of the things that would be in line with the FOIA report. And so I'm happy to provide additional information for this for anyone who's interested. The State Board has been subpoenaed for a court case that the Office of the Attorney General is seeking against the company that produces Juul e-cigarettes. There is no action needed by individual board members at this time. We are not a party to the lawsuit. We are not being sued or anything like that, but we are being subpoenaed because of some of the actions that the board took back in 2019, including passing a resolution asking for the council to ban e-cigarettes and those types of things. So I will keep you informed as we go forward with the subpoena.
Thank you. And last but not least, the Recovery Committee, formerly the Recovery Task Force, you should have all received the preliminary findings from our survey of principals. I will give headlines of our findings, and then we can open it up for a brief discussion. In terms of process, staff will turn the findings and the data that we did receive into a memo that we will adopt formally at our, or I should say, we will vote on formally at our May public meeting. And so I'm happy to share that our survey, we had 39 responses, which equates to approximately a quarter of schools in DC. We heard from principals from a quarter of schools. Just over 40% of responses that they would have to reduce staff without federal funds. That came at a time before recent announcements of additional funding to schools. And so that is good news for sure. The needs of schools are wide ranging, from SEL to engagement, academic supports to PPE. And so we really saw a wide range of needs communicated from school leaders. Previous federal funds have been overwhelmingly used for technology for students, as staff, as well as PPE. And so I'm thinking back to our conversations with the Digital Equity for Education group and their constant push for a broader engagement around technology access. That is what we're also hearing from our principals. School leaders would like to see technology embedded in the permanent school budget in a more comprehensive way. And then lastly, priorities for summer and school year 21-22 are mental health and behavioral supports for students and staff, high dosage tutoring, and SEL programming for teachers. Outdoor learning and establishing a community school were also high on the list. And so those were some of the preliminary findings that we pulled out of what we heard from principals. I would love to hear your thoughts, questions, or any discussion on our first real substantive action item as a board, this survey of principals. Vice President Gasoy.
I'm sorry if I missed this, but did you mention the representation from wards? Was there a pretty even representation?
I did not. Let me check on that in terms, or Mr. Hayworth, if you can help me in terms of the actual breakdown, but we can get that to you.
So that analysis isn't completed yet. We didn't ask for wards, but we did ask for the school names. And so we did, we're in the process of doing that analysis now, and we'll be able to update you as soon as the report is completed.
Okay, thank you.
I just saw Representative Thompson's comment in the chat. Representative Thompson, you have a question?
No, my question was answered by John Paul, but I did have a comment actually for the admin report. I was just going to say I appreciate all the thoughtfulness that went into everybody's committee work plans, and I appreciate the willingness of the staff and the leadership to figure out how we're going to get all this done. That matters. I do want to flag my comment earlier during the OSCE session. I really think it's important that we lean on OSCE to figure out whatever this meaningful engagement is. That matters for this committee in particular. I mean, it matters for us all, but it matters for this in particular, because this is more money than people have seen in a long time. And it is essentially, I keep saying this because I don't know a better way to describe it, a big federal block grant. And there are very few instructions/restrictions from the department. And there's very little in the legislation that describes how the money has to be used. So 2/3 of that money is already in the district's hands. The final third is incumbent upon this plan that they have to submit on June 6th. And so when I say there are other things that we have to be doing, this is one of those things that we really need to be on top of, because if we really want to be impactful as far as response, recovery, reimagining, this would be the ship that's coming in to make all that possible. So
that is a great push. We will add that to our meeting agendas for both the chairman as well as OSCE. Representative Thompson, if you could do me a favor personally, and I don't know if Mr. Hayworth, you have this information, could you just send me just a high level blurb of the grant information? Because I'm not as well versed as it seems like you are. And then we will be sure to follow up with Justin and Superintendent Young and the crew. That would be great. Thank you for that. Representative O'Leary.
I have two things. First is what she said after Ebony Rose. And the second thing is, did the principals talk anything about their inability to hire staff with the federal money? Because that was one of the things that came up with all the meetings that I went to about in the last 3 or 4 months, that everyone felt that their hands were tied because no one could come up with a decision about what the money could be used on. Because I think, just as Ebony Rose said, we need the accountability for every single federal dollar needs to be public.
I agree. Yes, we did. Yes, we did see that in the survey responses. I would also say anecdotally from Ward 5 principals, before the announcement last week of additional funding being provided, I heard that there was a need and a desire for more staff. Even now, after the funding is being provided, principals are still having to juggle like, oh, maybe I have more money, which they're certainly appreciative of, but am I going to use that money for a DSL position, a Spanish teacher or a counselor? There are still some hard choices that are needing to be made. So without a doubt, principals are wanting more money for staff for sure.
And that also, just to piggyback on that, that's why it's important that everyone testifies on the 26th of May.
Yes, I completely.
And can I add one thing to that too? Could we, would it be, I don't know if this is possible, but would it be possible that we could find out if everyone is going to testify, what specifically their testimony is, or generally what it's going to be about, so we don't talk about the same thing in our testimony?
Yes, we can offline ask members to submit or share testimony, just so we have a line in sight to that.
Just a general idea. It doesn't have to be their testimony. Just if I'm going to talk about staffing, using the money for staffing, and you were going to talk about that, then I wouldn't talk about it because you're going to talk about it.
Yeah, yes, we can coordinate on that. I think that's a good idea. Representative Sutter.
Yeah, thank you. I will also echo what she said to Representative Thompson's push on the rescue plan and how we engage with OSSI on this, because I think what we heard from the principals obviously is some of it is specific to their school, but the themes that our staff distills out of the survey results are exactly the kind of thing I hope we will present to OSSI for the state plan. I think the other thing I want to push us on is, and I want to say this very carefully because I understand the push to make sure that we have enough staff at every school to serve the needs of the children who are there. If we are engaging and providing feedback to OSSI on how we spend this large amount of money, what I hope we do is think about, if we're really trying to push the system forward, what does that look like? And it shouldn't just be Band-Aids on the current problems, but it should be the vision for how we fix the problems for the long haul. That's tough because it may cause some folks to say, that's not what I need right now. So how we as elected representatives can both hear from folks what they need right now, but also push for spending that really changes the trajectory for years ahead. So that we do a both and, but that we're really thoughtful about a visionary, change focused spending of this large bucket of money.
Yes, yes. And that's my understanding of what that upcoming hearing is about. Like, what is our future vision for the district? Yeah.
The May 26th one that Charles and Vincent are holding? Yeah. And then our budget, but is that what you're talking about, Fraser? Or are you talking about the budget hearings?
You're muted.
The big meeting, not the budget hearing.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Ruth.
We hope the after COVID hearing.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. I thought I saw another hand. Representative Weidenberg.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on the fiscal cliff and the hiring. And it's a little bit of both ideas here. First of all, this idea of the fiscal cliff, we have 30% turnover every year. The idea that we're going to, 3 years from now, we're going to have too many people on staff and we're going to have to fire people, wouldn't that be lovely that many people stayed in the system and we were faced with that? I think it's extremely unlikely, and I think it's worth somebody actually putting pen to paper and do some calculations about how many people could be hired with this, that given 30% turnover, there wouldn't be any fiscal cliff at all. I think that's an important fact for us to understand. That said, the point here is not the Band-Aids. The point here is to do what's important to do and to figure out what that is. I think that is consistent with if we go back to school in the fall and the staff is all ripped up because people have been laid off and there's been both the change in the staff and which has its effect on the culture and on the emotional life of the school, that's bad. And it's going to hurt whatever else it is we're trying to put in place. So I think we need to sort of thread all these together as we go forward on it.
Thank you. And staff, just so you all are clear, the clock only goes up to 10 minutes. And so staff will restart the clock. It's not that we're out of time. I think we should have maybe 2 or 3 more minutes, given that we yielded some time. One last thing I would just note, kind of dovetailing to what Representative Wattenberg was just saying, is that in terms of process, but also intentionality. So Representative Wattenberg asked in the chat earlier, will we share headlines from the survey that I just verbally provided? Yes, we will do that, as well as staff is going to generate a more formal memo that we'll vote on. I will share those headlines ideally tomorrow, but it may come Friday. And then you will get the formal memo as we inch closer to the public hearing. In terms of the intentionality, something that is clear to me is the wide-ranging nature of principal needs, requests, perspectives, and what I've picked up in Ward 5 at least is that at times that is in conflict with what community members and/or parents are saying. And so parents sometimes are saying, we want X, we want to hire Y, and principals are saying, no, but I need this position, or I think based on my perspective, I want this. And so I say all that to say, our advocacy will need to balance those two things, what we're hearing from constituents, what we may be hearing from parents, but also what our survey results are saying principals are communicating. And that is sometimes at a tension. So especially when you have limited resources.
Also, the thing about it is that we are all different. All of our wards are different. There's when we talk about equity, it's a different kind of equity. Because like Emily and I we have more, Spanish-speaking students than the other wards do. So, what a principal needs in Ward 1 or Ward 4 is different than what a principal needs as far as equity in Wards 6 and Ward 7.
That's absolutely right. And so, yes, I think to that point, and the question earlier around, did we break this down by ward? We didn't, but we will try, and I'm going to ask staff to try to represent it as best as we can by ward, because to your point, Representative O'Leary, I think that is important because the constituencies are a little different in different parts of the city. So more to come here. We will share these findings with the chairman. We will share them with OSSI. We will share headlines with you this week, and then you'll get the formal memo ahead of our public meeting. So thank you again. I think that is all of our committee reports. We are now going to move to new business. I believe Representative Thompson, you mentioned earlier you had something you wanted to add to new business. Representative Sutter, I see your hand. So let's go Representative Thompson, Representative Sutter. I'm not seeing any other requests. And also you received a memo around how state agencies compare in terms of their support for LEAs and districts. We'll open it up for a very brief conversation there, and then we will move to close. So Representative Thompson.
All right. Almost there. So I have two separate things. Thing one is I'm going to be a better board member and colleague in sharing what's happening with the NAVC PEP committee, because I've not been great about that, but I have been attending the meetings. I do serve on the subcommittee that is focused on equity in particular, and we are making our recommendations to the larger committee. This is going to be our second attempt at making a recommendation to the larger committee. One of the things that I asked the more seasoned members of the committee were like, how are they getting feedback as far as the recommendations that will ultimately be NASB recommendations? Because we've kind of chunked it in a weird way. And so I think what I'm going to start to do is at each meeting, I'll just forward like what the draft is. And that way, if you all as board members have feedback on that particular recommendation, it might not be something I am necessarily working on. It can be captured and it can be shared with the committee because I do want to make sure that I'm representing you all's feedback well. I will flag that for the equity subcommittee, one of the big recommendations we made was to add a section on racial equity because it was not there. And I'm going to share what we have. There was some discussion around some of the language. In particular, people felt uncomfortable with systemic racism as a term. We can talk. I don't have a complete background on that. We talk about that offline. And if people have any suggestions, let me know once you read what we've written. But we really wanted to pull out and make sure that we are highlighting the challenges, highlighting and eliminating the challenges that young people face, no matter what their color is. And that was not, there were echoes of that in the equity document, but it was not front and center. And so that's important for our subcommittee. So I want to flag that. I'll be a better committee member and a better state board member and share those things more regularly. So that's the first thing, is first step to holding myself accountable. The second thing, one of the reasons that, one of the things I started to bring up during the timeline conversation is, I know that as board members, we receive a stipend, and that's great. And the stipend is for my time. But I'm really wondering, like, as we enter like future budget conversations, if there are supports we have built in around like outreach and materials. So like for my board in particular, just sending things electronically is insufficient. It just is, it's completely insufficient. And I probably have 11,000 to maybe 13,000 now school age kids in Ward 7. I'm not going to sit here and act like every day, all day, I'm going to walk around handing out flyers. But printed materials are important. In addition to like my email list at this point is a little over 1,000. And so every time I send an email blast, every month I get charged for my email blast, and those are expenses. I know that we're not allowed to have like constituent service accounts. I do think we need to look into the board, like if there's money to support us running for positions, there should also probably be some type of supports to do those positions well, because I want to be able to do my position well. And so I think it's something to kind of discuss and figure out like what, or maybe share some best practices around like how we really support outreach and engagement efforts. Because if not, then like, I don't know how we could get to a place of actual start to talk about equity as far as outreach and engagement and making sure people have what they need. Because kind of necessary. So that would be my public scolding of myself for today and my soapbox all in one speech.
Thank you for that. I think we would all agree that more resources are needed to effectively do the job. But again, more to come on that. And I do think there's an opportunity this budget season to explore what might that look like in a budget. I don't even know if that's possible. And so that will be something maybe we can take up in the admin committee as we're reflecting on the budget. I will say, and we've discussed it before, but just to reiterate, we are making pretty aggressive pushes to the powers that be to really expand the staff and supports for our sister offices, knowing that they have long been understaffed, under-resourced. And so just putting that top of mind as well. So, Representative Sutter.
Awesome. Thank you. So I have two things as well. The first is a request. I have started to hear from some schools in Ward 6 concerns about the return to school in the fall and the physical facility capacity to have all children or nearly all children back in a building with physical distancing, and about the fact that they haven't heard much about what will happen if they are able to enroll all their students back in person, but cannot physically fit them all in the building with 3 feet of distance. So I've reached out to the Deputy Mayor for Education's office to try to understand what may be underway for a system level examination of that problem. But one thing I think would be helpful is to know if this is a problem in your wards. So I have reached out to the school leaders, both charter and DCPS in Ward 6, to ask for that input, to see, like, is this a concern they have? And are there any other concerns I should know about? And I've heard from 2 schools already that have explicitly said, yes, this is a problem for us, 1 DCPS and 1 charter. So if you all are having these conversations or know, if you would send me any information that would be helpful, I would just love to be ready with information when I hear back from the Deputy Mayor's office to be able to say, I'm hearing about at least X number of schools across X number of wards that are struggling with this problem. So I want to make sure we can get on it. Essentially, I want to have in my back pocket a ready response in case there's a feeling that maybe this isn't an issue or this is something that schools can or should handle on their own. I know some schools raised this question for the spring and didn't have a whole lot of luck getting it handled to return more schools in person. So I'm going to pause there in case folks who have hands up have questions for me on that before I go to my second thing.
So it's not necessarily a question, it's more a comment.
Sure.
So I think this is important, but I also think there is a unique opportunity for the DME to play in coordination. Because one of the things I'm worried about is that if there's not any coordination, like it could be 1 DCPS and 1 charter or 2 charters because they're their own school districts aren't talking to each other. They both have the same issues. And I don't know, everybody buys trailers and then you got little trailers all over the place, as opposed to some type of way to say, okay, well, these 2 schools are close to each other and they could work together for this year to maybe like rent out this building that's close to them that actually would be a better space for students. And I'm a little concerned that we don't, I really think it's a missed opportunity if our leadership isn't looking across to figure out how to facilitate those connections and create those opportunities. Because yes, it's a lot of money, which means that people will spend it. But it also means that we can create some efficiencies so we can, we'll have more to go around. And I think the facilities issue in particular is one where the DME can step in and be helpful in facilitating some partnership and coordination. So I'll reach out to my principals and I'll double down on that as important.
Awesome, thank you. I agree 100%. I think this has to be a system level conversation. It can't be school by school or LEA by LEA.
Representative Wattenberg.
Yeah, I'll just say definitely it's coming up. I'm talking to people. I had to go back and forth with someone at DCPS today just to, clarify that indeed the plan was to open full time for everybody in the fall. That still seems to be the plan. And I guess what I find very kind of complicated and can't get my arms around on this is there was a time in the spring, and some of you know this, where I was pushing very hard that in the fall we had to really have extra staff, we had to have extra buildings, we had to really be ready for this. And I guess since then, it sort of seems like, you're going to have everybody vaccinated. And then my question is, if everybody really is vaccinated, how much of that do you need? And are we going to get any, and all of our advice at the beginning of, the school planning is advice from DOH. And my sense is that DOH and CDC are going to be saying, we don't need that. So that's what I don't understand. So I just put it out there.
Ruth, my quick response is just that I know that even with vaccines seeking approval for young children, that the likelihood that children will be vaccinated by the time we go back to school in the fall is very low. And so that distancing is likely to still be in place, as well as masking, for some time as we roll out vaccines to children. So I do think that there's going to be a need for distance in the fall, is my best understanding.
Well, yes, at the elementary schools, I think that's right. And let me throw one other thing out on that, which is something I talked to some principals about, which is with the new social distancing rules that exist, so much really depends on the size of your classroom, and the sizes of classrooms are really, really different. Newer schools tend to have larger classrooms, older schools, older wings tend to have smaller classrooms. So that really becomes an issue.
Representative O'Leary.
In Ward 4, we have two school systems. We have the new schools, the high schools and the middle and the secondary school and the middle schools are all brand new. But we have about 5 or 6 elementary schools that are really old, older than I am. And they're not ready to take students in a normal time because these buildings aren't safe. They're not up to what they're supposed to be as far as elevators and things like that. And so there are those old schools throughout the city that can't handle any kind of social distancing or masking or anything like that. But like you said, people seem to think that, nobody's dying a whole lot right now from COVID, so everything's fine. Let's just get back to what they want to call the new normal. We don't want anything to do with normal. So a lot of schools weren't working 2 years ago, and we've got to really advocate for making sure that the information is given out. We don't know anything about what's going on in the schools. They don't have to share information, and they don't. And we don't know what's going to happen in the summertime, which is going to be the most important educational time in the history of this city, is what's going to happen in summer to get kids ready for August, to pull them back up to where they are educationally. Okay, I'm off my soapbox.
Vice President Gasoy. You're muted.
I know. Quickly, just kind of piggybacking on this issue that you've raised, Jessica, I agree, and I will inquire, but also what's coming up in my ward is families who don't feel safe going back at all. And so there is a question about, will those families be accommodated? And I think it's sort of a, related question that I would like to hear, if that's something coming up in your wards as well. And what I've heard from the chancellor so far is that they are really making a push for everybody to go back. So there isn't a clear, it's not clear that there will be accommodations for those families. And I don't know. So that's an issue too. And then I feel like there were 3 things, but the other thing I just wanted to note is outdoor learning. So there's at least 3 schools in our city, 3 different wards where there are schools using outdoor learning to address this very problem. And one of them is Wilson in Ward 3, where the principal is really going for it and creating semi-permanent spaces, I think, it as a way of alleviating some of the overcrowding that was just there without COVID. In my ward, Tubman is exploring this, possibly doing like lunch and some of the PE classes that they would normally have inside, outside, so that they can use those big spaces to have, you know, the social distancing that they need. And I don't know if this is entirely accurate, Carlene, so correct me if I'm wrong, but in Ward 8, Patterson now is, you know, planning to have an expanded outdoor classroom footprint, which I don't know if they're planning to use that as a way to address the social distancing question, but I do know that they are going to be having like year-round outdoor learning, multiple spaces that are not just about gardening. So those are sort of exciting pilots. And I guess, you know, I think it would be good to gather data from those examples as they unfold. So that's all.
Great. Yeah, I think any and all of this will be really helpful, but I appreciate that folks share the concern. So if there is information that you think could be helpful to share more broadly, I'm happy to start compiling it and make it available to folks as we learn more about this. My second thing, today was Bike to School Day in Ward 6. We met at Lincoln Park and we had great bike marshals from the Streets Are Calling bike group, as well as from the DC Metropolitan Police Department 1D bicycle officers. And there was a poster that asked students to share what would make them feel safer about biking. And this comes on the heels of weeks and weeks of pedestrian and cyclist injuries and deaths in the city, which are up significantly over past years. And there's lots of discussion as to why. But one thing that seems clear that could help children feel safer, according to the poster, and could prevent some of these deaths for pedestrians, cyclists, injuries for those folks, is better infrastructure to promote safety on our roads. I tweeted about the accident that happened at Haynes Point, in which 2 pedestrians who were both people who were formerly homeless, who were activists for folks who were unhoused, were killed. And some folks from the DC Bicycle Advisory Committee tweeted back at me. And they asked specifically how the state board was going to get involved with helping make sure that areas around schools were safe for pedestrians and cyclists, whether they be children or teachers or parents doing drop-off. And I offered to bring it up at our working session. The children today at the bike event posted that they would feel safer with more bike lanes and more protected bike lanes. And then I spoke with some of the ANC commissioners who came to the event, who talked about the need for raised crosswalks that act as speed tables at schools, for infrastructure. Apparently in the UK, they have a thing called school streets, in which the place where families drop off is closed to other traffic during that day. And there's a sort of admit process using people. So one thing I'd like to propose for the board, and Carlene, I think this is the piece that I think goes nicely with the advocacy question, is how do we think about safe routes to school and safe passage and expand it to the safety of the children in our schools, both in the summer and they're playing, but also in the physical safety of traveling to school, whether that be walking across the street, crossing at intersections. I know Ward 7 and 8 have some of the highest rates of pedestrian incidents with vehicles because of crossing zones that are not well marked or people traveling at high rates of speed. So I'd love to see our board get involved in thinking about this as a school safety, safe passage, safe routes effort. And I'm happy to have this be step 1 in the advocacy process, but let me know how to help move it to step 2 and beyond, because I think it's really important for how we think about the return to school in the fall. My hunch is that the cities were so quiet for so long with so little traffic that people just started getting used to driving real fast. And now traffic is back and people are back and cars are still driving real fast. And we're running up against this, this problem exacerbating right now. And I think we're certainly not going to make families feel safer about returning to schools in person if they don't feel safe in the building or on the way to the building. So that's my pitch.
Thank you for that. I echo the concern. I agree that it's important. I think perhaps we should consider a resolution on it. I also think there is a connection to like student transportation, especially for our students with disabilities. I know we took that up last year, I believe, but there's a lot of intersections around like safe transportation that connects with our stances before, but also our areas in our purview. So hopefully we can take this up. Lastly, members, I know that the night is drawing long. State agency supports for schools, districts. You received a memo from Darren that outlines how OSSI supports LEAs compared to how Massachusetts, Nebraska, Louisiana supports schools and districts. This is just a very high level, knowing Darren and his love for going very deep into issues. We intentionally asked him to keep it relatively high level as we are just at the beginning stages of this. And so why are we talking about this? Several members have talked about a need to deepen our support. I've said it before, this is a hill that I am planning to die on, that we need as a city to better support our LEAs. I thought it was interesting in OSSI's presentation to see their theory of action. I would encourage you to go back and look at that graphic that was part of their presentation. And a lot of what struck me was that a lot of their support seemed to be optional professional development. No heat, no judgment. But as you look at the memo from other states, namely Massachusetts, it seems as though their other state agencies are providing more comprehensive, regionally based, direct to school supports, especially those that are in trouble. A few other things I will say, and then just would love to open it up to hear other people's thoughts. And Representative Weidenberg, correct me if I'm wrong, it is the bottom 5% of schools identified as it relates to our SF framework receive comprehensive support from OSSI. It is my understanding, though, that that is largely based on money. So they are receiving money. And I'm sure there are some like action plans. And I don't mean this as a criticism, but I do wonder, is there more that we could do as a state level agency to provide comprehensive support to LEAs? Last thing I'll leave you with that our friends at OSSI shared with me that is sticking with me is that there is a very thin line between support and what folks see as accountability, and just wanting to be sensitive to that as well. And so obviously we're talking about how state agencies support, but you know, when folk are in your building, are reaching out and calling LEAs, schools may not necessarily see that as support, but more so as big brother looking over my shoulder. So with that, I'll open it up. Thoughts about the memo that Darren shared and ways that we as a board might elevate this issue of expanding the supports that OSSI as a state agency provides to LEAs. Representative Sutter.
One thing that I'll offer, I really appreciate the memo Darren provided, and I only got to briefly skim it, but I noticed this when the professor from Tennessee was speaking, and it's true, I think, for Louisiana as well, and I'm doing some work in Texas, so I've been reading up on them. When folks in the southern states like those talk about the way their state education agency deals with districts, they talk about being local control states, where the districts have a lot of autonomy. We don't use that term. We talk about autonomy, but essentially we're a local control state where we've got LEAs making a lot of the decisions. So I wonder if as we look at the supports, we can look to what local control states have done to see what supports have worked well in places where local control is a sort of deeply enshrined and tightly held value. Because there are lots of states like that that still have SEAs that are doing really good work. Louisiana being one of them. I think the Texas Education Agency is doing great things as well. So that's my one wondering right now is what can we learn from states that have that level of local control about how their SEAs provide support, and what parallels might we find there?
Yep. No, I think that's a good push. And so can I just ask a clarifying question? Is the wondering there around like how can we protect the autonomy of LEAs, around like the concern around local control?
I think my wondering is in reference to your point where Asi notes that there's a fine line between people feeling support versus feeling accountability, that my sense is that in places with local control where autonomy of the district is a value, that it's about the high quality of the resources the SEA is offering, that districts see a value in using those resources and taking those supports, rather than feeling like I'm under the thumb of the state. This is pretty good stuff. I want to be part of this good stuff. I see this as a value add. So that's my sense, but I think there's a lot to explore there. I do think it would be hard to change the autonomous nature of the way our schools, our districts think about things.
Yeah. Other thoughts? And I would just say it's less about trying to change the autonomy of schools. This is just me speaking. I personally think we overdial on accountability in DC and not on support. I think our STAR framework, to the conversations earlier, point to that. We now have labeled schools, and the questions I would put forth to Asi and us as a board is, all right, what are we doing for those schools that, and granted, we have issues with the stars themselves, but even still, if we take that at face value, what are we doing for 3-star schools and 2-star schools and 1-star schools? And I think this becomes really important when we are now talking or entertaining thoughts around closing schools, thinking about what happened last year in DCPS. So I think it's much more that the state needs to be accountable to what they're doing to improve schools than just holding them accountable to some arbitrary metric. But that's my 2 cents. Any other thoughts here? If not, we can table this, but just want to remind you that we are hoping to have a panel discussion on what states are doing to support LEAs in schools at our public meeting. All right, I am not seeing anything. Oh, Representative Thompson, sorry.
So I want to make sure I understand. So I know we're having a panel, but like, is this, as a board, is this a larger ongoing conversation we're expecting to have? Because I don't, I'm not sure where this lives as far as like our work. Or like how to interact with it. But I think it's important. I think what, and I actually want to lift up something that Representative Sutter said about values. I actually think we underestimate what it means to hold autonomy so high as value. It is both on the accountability side, what I can make you do. So a lot of the questions around licensure earlier, and like, do we have certain data around charter teachers, and like why would we collect how many charter teachers have a license if we're not requiring them to get a license? That doesn't make sense. Because then there's that again, that goes back to the value of autonomy. If we want to know that, then maybe we should require it. Like but then there's a whole dance that we're going to do, which again comes down to autonomy. It's the same thing with support. If I'm saying to you that you're autonomous, but I have certain supports, I'm playing the game of not like this is what's good, and like there's an expectation that like the expectation is you take advantage. Is you take advantage if you see it as good too. It's a persuasion game.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if we're fully honest with ourselves as a city with what it means to hold autonomy so high as values and time. I'm not saying that we want to put everybody under our thumb. I'm not saying that we should go all big brother crazy with it. I am saying that some of the things that we hold dear are also things that limit how we move in the world and what we're able to do for schools and for students. And so if that is a larger conversation, but that's the wall we're going to keep running into.
I 1,000,000% agree. And to your earlier question around where does this fit in, I think this dovetails perfectly with the conversations the Assessment and Accountability Committee are having around our STAR framework, the ESSA framework. I think you're absolutely right. It does challenge some of the assumptions and notions. I took note that OSSI said their interpretation of the law was that they had to mandate that DCPS did something that charters didn't. That was interesting to me. And so I think you're absolutely right. It is my hope that as a board, we can lean in here. I think there is a connection with the assessment and accountability system. I know people have a general interest in better supporting schools, but I think there are some opportunities for us as a board to really push on this support issue. To put the onus on the system, us as a state agency to do our part versus just focusing on teachers and or schools. But that's my 2 cents. So I look forward to talking more about this and sharing more, and hopefully we can have a broader conversation at the public meeting. With that, with 3 minutes to spare, I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn. I can see Representative O'Leary is just bursting at the seams to want to continue the conversation. But
I am. I have a long treatise on how we can get rid of autonomy, but I won't share it. I'll put it in the chat. Hold your breath. I make a motion that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Being properly moved and seconded, it is now 8:28 p.m.
We have to vote.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. It's been a long day. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please say nay. It seems the ayes have it. It is 8:28 p.m. And this meeting of the State Board is adjourned. Thank you to members of the public. And we hope that you would join us at our May public meeting.